No body, no case. It was said in English law after the miracle of Campton. But in our story, there is no body, but there is a case. On a November morning in 2011, Galina Kolyadzinskaya returned home to her rented apartment on Uborovicha Street in Vladivostok and disappeared. 3 years later, her boyfriend Victor Cohen was convicted of her murder. But no physical evidence of Galina's alleged death was presented at the trial, and her parents still believe she is alive and are waiting for her return. In April 2024, Victor Cohen was released from prison, and the case regained popularity, dividing the public into two camps. Some believe that Victor served time for a crime that did not happen, while others are convinced that the sentence received for murder is too short. Let's find out together how a high-profile criminal case about the disappearance and murder of a man with no evidence progressed throughout the country, causing controversy among observers and the creation of groups to search for Galina. Viktor Polovov was born July 9, 1988 in Vladivostok. He took the surname Cohen in 2012. Parents divorced when the boy was very young, so his upbringing completely fell on the female shoulders of his mother and grandmother. In 2005, he graduated from high school, gymnasium of the Far Eastern State University. He entered the Institute of Mass Communications of the same university at the Department of PR, but after 6 months, he dropped out. In 2007, Ilona Kolyadzinskaya introduced her classmate Viktor to her sister Galina, who was 3.5 years older than him. Galina Kolyadzinskaya was born on April 22, 1985 in Rostov-on-Don. At the age of 13, her parents moved to Vladivostok. The girl was distinguished by a bright appearance, stood out theatricalized manner of dressing. She was slender, well-read, and very artistic. She graduated from school, studied at an art school, then entered the Faculty of Design of the Far Eastern Federal University. Victor was smitten with her, and for the first time, he truly fell in love. Both of them dreamed of entering the Theater Institute, so Victor dropped out of school and they left their native Vladivostok for Moscow. Galina failed the entrance exams, but Vitya did not. But out of solidarity with his favorite girl, he decided to return home. Both returned to Vladivostok, where they started living together. On his return, Victor learned about his grandfather's death and the inheritance he had left him. With this money, the lovers rented an apartment in the city center, bought a car each, and decided to invest the remaining sum in a profitable business. They tried to organize a shop for the production of car tires, opened a network of donut shops, and even resold church kila. But all projects quickly went into loss, which led the young couple in despondency. Over time, disagreements between the young people began to destroy their relationship. The couple quarreled violently, and it did not do without violence. Once Galina's friends witnessed a quarrel between them when Victor lifted his girlfriend by the neck. However, Galina sometimes did the same. She could hit her boyfriend or break the furniture in their rented apartment. Eventually, Galina started going to nightclubs more and more often, and Victor became interested in other women, running away from the problems in his current life. On the morning of November 14, 2011, Galina returned home after another visit to the club and was very much on her merry way. Victor was not at home, which made Galina furious, and at 6:43 a.m. she called him and demanded his immediate return. 15 minutes later, Victor was already in their rented apartment. A quarrel took place between the young people, as a result of which they decided to finally part ways. Instead of the previously donated car, Galina demanded 300,000 rubles from Victor, and then she would leave and not bother him. Victor gave her the money, and she left the apartment, as it turned out, forever. The next day, Galina's parents got worried and started calling her, but her phone was switched off. Victor did not answer their calls either. Only on the second day after Galina left, he contacted the girl's mother and told her that there had been a quarrel. She had extorted a large sum of money from him, then packed her things and left. "You will never see me again. Don't look for me. Tell my mom that everything is fine with me." Galina's last words from Victor's words. He also told Galina's mother that he repeatedly called her after she left, but the girl did not answer his calls either, because the phone was simply turned off. At first, Friends and parents of the missing Galina were not surprised by her sudden disappearance, because she was famous for her flighty behavior and could disappear for several days. But 3 days later, Galina Kolyadzinskaya's father wrote a statement to the police about his daughter's disappearance, and the law enforcement agencies began to search for her. Specialists zealously took up the case, and Victor was first of all summoned to the station for a conversation. He was the last person to see Galina and could clarify many points of interest. During the interrogation, Victor did not deny that he often quarreled with his girlfriend, whom he had grown cold to and had another woman. Victor said that he was fed up with his scandalous girlfriend, who in a fit of jealousy could raise her hand against him or pour yogurt on his car. Once, being in an inebriated state, Galina said she would tear her rival's hair out if he continued to date her. "I didn't kill Galina. Yes, we quarreled with her. She packed her things, took all our money, 300,000 rubles, and left. Where she went, I don't know," Victor insisted. The investigation team also examined the apartment where the young people lived together, both their cars, but no traces of blood or other evidence pointing to Galina's murder were found. Victor was even tested on a lie detector. During the interview, the young man was confused in his testimony, but his involvement in Galina's disappearance was not proven. Having questioned Galina's acquaintances and neighbors, the police decided to refuse to initiate a criminal case, as no signs of corpus delicti were found. However, Galina had never traveled outside Vladivostok. She did not have a foreign passport. Victor collected Galina's belongings and gave them to her parents, and he himself moved in with his new girlfriend Tatyana and started a new life. The feelings of young people were so strong that in 2012 they decided to get married. It was then that Victor finally got rid of his father's surname, which had been weighing him down since childhood. He liked the Cohen option, which was offered by his future wife, who heard the beautiful surname in one of the movies. Everyone forgot about the missing Galina Kolyadzinskaya for several years. 3 years of married life of a young married couple, Cohen flew quite happily. They traveled a lot, went to the mountains, and lived a quiet and measured life. But everything changed when the case of Galina's disappearance was reclassified as a murder case, because for 3 years she never showed up. Galina's mother, Elena Kolyadzinskaya, did not worry much at first. She knew that her daughter was a creative and fickle nature, could go somewhere just by mood. Perhaps this explains why the case did not become a criminal case for almost 3 years, because no one insisted. In June 2014, based on the materials of the inspection on the fact of Galina Kolyadzinskaya's unknown disappearance, a criminal case under the article murder was initiated. The girl was put on the wanted list as missing, and employees of the Crime Investigation Department began to work out various versions of Galina's disappearance, from going abroad to work in the modeling business to murder. In the course of working out the latter version, Kolyadzinskaya's ex-boyfriend came to the attention of the police. It turned out that Cohen and Galina often quarreled. The girl made him jealous scenes because of his relationship with another woman. There was also information that Galina was planning a trip to Korea. In her youth, she had already worked as a model in China and was going to continue her career in this field. Ex-boyfriend Victor Cohen became the main suspect because he was the last person who saw Galina alive. The testimony regarding the facts of Galina's disappearance, which Victor and witnesses had previously given at various stages of the case, also gave reason to believe that Victor might be involved in the crime. On July 23, 2014, Victor was summoned for questioning, where he was detained and taken to the investigation unit. There he confessed that after another quarrel, in the morning of November 14, 2011, he strangled Galina, subsequently dismembered the body in the bathroom, put the remains in 3 plastic buckets, took them to a wooded area near the factory Variag, where he built a fire with tires, burned the body, and scattered the ashes in different places. Victor Cohen behaved confidently during the interrogation. He spoke to the investigator on "you," did not choose expressions, and swore a lot. He frankly, as at a friendly conversation, told the story of his life from birth to the present day. Experienced operatives were amazed at the coolness and cynicism with which he recalled how he dismembered and burned Galina. the former lover sat in front of the police officers with his feet on the ground and smiled. He felt invulnerable. Victor lamented to the investigator that he had originally intended to boil the body in a steamer, put it through a meat grinder, and flush it down the toilet. But he eventually abandoned this method, fearing that the sewer system would be clogged and he could be identified. At the same interrogation, he stated that he strangled Galina because she was interfering with his new relationship. According to Victor's memories, his ex-girlfriend was an unconventional person who craved attention. She often disappeared in nightclubs, and because of the fiery temper, could make a loud scandal at home. In conversations, Galina often mentioned that she would like a beautiful life of an escort model, and at the same time did not want to believe the arguments that without the provision of services of an intimate nature, such work is impossible. Victor accepted all the eccentric actions of his friend and continued to consider her a pleasant and interesting person until a certain time. From Victor Cohen's interrogation, I was taken by annoyance. I was standing near the coffee machine. I took a coffee. As I stood there, something in me turned. There was this one person, and that was it. I went home, walked over to her sleeping, said, "I'm sorry," and started choking her. She woke up, started to struggle. I strangled her for a long time. Then I left the house and cried. It wasn't fear. It was frustration, loss. I realized what I had done, but as a rational person, I did not lose my temper. After the interrogation, the operatives took Victor to the house where he lived with Galina Kolyadzinskaya in November 2011 for an investigative experiment. In the apartment, Victor demonstrated how he strangled Galina on a folding sofa that night. According to him, she did not resist, as she was drunk and fell asleep. When he was convinced that she was dead, he left the apartment in a hurry and went to his car, where he came up with a cold-blooded plan to get rid of the body. Victor learned about the intricate way to get rid of the body from a documentary about India, where the bodies of the deceased are burned, and quite often use car tires for this ritual to reach the right burning temperature. Victor told the operatives that it was much easier to kill and dispose of the body than he had imagined. Late at night, Victor was taken to the very vacant lot where he allegedly disposed of Galina's remains. In pitch darkness, Cohen had to point out the specific place where he had burned the girl's body. According to human rights activists, he was taken to a place where there were no traffic or CCTV cameras, so that there was no way to prove his innocence. The case also lacked important details, which Victor himself pointed out repeatedly. It was not clear how and what he used to cut up the body, because an ordinary kitchen knife could not be used. Further, it was not quite clear how he managed to put Galina's remains in 3 buckets, and how he carried these buckets out of the entrance in full view of everyone and why no one paid attention to it. Then the investigation questioned the Bygolovs, who rented the apartment to Galina and Victor. They admitted that they were unable to contact Victor after they learned that the police were in the apartment. When they arrived to check their accommodation, they found the apartment empty. There were no tenants or their belongings. On the ceiling, they found brown-colored splatters, as the couple thought it was from coffee or tea, and there were black streaks on the wallpaper, most likely from storing car tires. But the detainee, Victor Cohen, did not know that his interrogations were recorded by a video camera. When he realized that he had told too much on camera, he recanted his testimony, stating that during the interrogation at the Operative Investigation Unit on Karbasheva Street, they forced confessions out of him using unauthorized interrogation methods, and when his wife Tatyana came to the same station, Victor was threatened that they would harm her as well. He added that the story he told during the hour-long interrogation was made up by the operative officers, and that the place where the remains were burnt was determined based on his phone billing that night. But was torture really torture? In the CCTV footage from the investigation unit, Tatyana Cohen drove up to the building at 6 p.m. She was not allowed inside, so she stayed outside. 20 minutes later, Victor was brought in for questioning, and Tatyana also entered the building around 6:30 p.m. The recording of the interrogation started at 6:38 p.m. Tortured for 8 minutes, whipped out a confession, made up a colorful and bloodthirsty story in great detail. On August 11, 2015, as a result of the first court hearing, Victor Cohen was found guilty of the murder of Galina Kolyadzinskaya, and by the court verdict of August 11, 2015, he was sentenced to 9 years, 10 months of imprisonment, with serving his sentence in a penal colony of strict regime. After Victor Cohen was charged with murder, his wife Tatyana became his most faithful defense counsel, convinced of his innocence. All Vladivostok residents actively followed the story and even went out to rallies in support of Victor Cohen. People divided themselves into defenders and accusers. Victor's wife continued to fight for her husband and did not lower her hands even after the terrible news that her spouse would have to spend almost 10 years behind bars. The revealing video, which was kept in the criminal case, was shown during the court session. The case became a high-profile one because during the court proceedings, Victor said that confessions were beaten out of him by interrogators with the help of threats and torture, as evidenced by hospital discharges, where he was diagnosed with concussion and ear barotrauma. A young, handsome man with huge brown eyes had strangled, dismembered, and burned his girlfriend in cold blood. No one could believe it. Charismatic guy could become an actor. He was even admitted to the Moscow Theater Institute. True, as we already know, Victor refused to study. Friends, classmates, just acquaintances from all sides described him positively. Lawyers built their defense on the fact that in the apartment where, according to the investigation, the murder took place, and at the place where he burned the body, not even traces of human DNA were found. There were even witnesses who allegedly saw Galina in the city after she disappeared. The public was fueled by Galina's mother, Elena Kolyadzinskaya. The unhappy woman sincerely believed that her daughter was alive. In all interviews, she said that Victor was not guilty, and Galina would soon come back and tell why she had disappeared and where she had been all this time. After the guilty verdict, Victor Cohen continued to call the circumstances of the murder, presented to the investigation, completely invented. After all, no biological traces were found at the alleged place of burning the remains of the victim. The forensic examination, conducted in Cohen's car and apartment, did not give convincing results either. The defendant was also sided with Galina's parents, who were convinced that their daughter was alive. The defendant's lawyer, Ivan Mikhailev, said at the time that the investigation had no objective evidence. The examination of the soil at the clearing, where his client allegedly burned the body, also yielded nothing. The examination did not show any biological traces. Later, it turned out that some of the case materials were also missing: inspection reports of the apartment and the car, lie detector data, and video from the camera, which were obtained back in 2011. Cohen's family and defense believed that the case was reclassified in order to relieve himself of responsibility for the unsolved crime. Galina was never found. Not agreeing with the court verdict, Victor filed an appeal and began to claim that he was not involved in the commission of the incriminated crime, and the confession was forced out of him by law enforcement officers. Tatyana Cohen launched a large-scale campaign in support of her husband. She appeared on various talk shows and programs, gathered rallies, actively maintained social networks, where she actively collected money for a lawyer, in return posting fake reports. On December 7, 2015, the Court of Appeals overturned the verdict due to violations of the Code of Criminal Procedure, and the case was sent to the Court of First Instance for a new trial in a different court. After the retrial by the Court of First Instance, Victor Cohen was also found guilty of the murder of Elena Kolyadzinskaya, and by the verdict of June 21, 2016, he was sentenced to 9 years and 9 months of imprisonment, with serving his sentence in a strict regime colony. The sentence was again appealed, but this time the Court of Appellate Instance on November 28, 2016, upheld the sentence, and Victor Cohen went to serve his sentence. After the appeal, Tatyana withdrew from all affairs, divorced Victor, and remarried. As it turned out, her role as a wife was a carefully planned game, because Tatyana began a new relationship immediately after Victor's detention. Nobody expected such a turn of events. Tatyana herself refused to comment. Despite the fact that the body of Elena Kolyadzinskaya was not found, the court ruled on the basis of circumstantial evidence against Victor Cohen, and there was plenty of it. First of all, this confession, in which Victor says that after the murder, he decided to get rid of the body by grinding it in a meat grinder. He went to the shopping center Maxim for it, where he actually bought a meat grinder and a pressure cooker in the Domatechnica store. In 2015, the investigation made a seizure of records from the database of the store about the purchases of meat grinders for November 14, 2011, and in one of the records was the surname Polovov. The time on the billing and the receipt from the database of the store coincide. Also, the store administrator confirmed in court that there was no tampering with the database for the purpose of falsification. Further, Victor Cohen's cell phone billings played an important role in the verdict. On November 14, 2011, from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., Victor stayed in the apartment. Most likely, he dismembered the body, and at night he took buckets with the body to the woods near the Varyag plant. Victor repeatedly reported that he called Galina after she left, but her phone was unavailable. However, Victor's phone billing showed that he did not call Galina between 10 a.m. and night. The last phone conversation he had was with Tatyana at 11:51 p.m., just in the neighborhood of the Varyag plant. Moreover, if you listen to the court sessions where the billing of Galina Kolyadzinskaya and Victor is announced, it is obvious that after Galina's disappearance, her relatives, friends, even Victor's mother called her, but not Victor himself. Given the fact that everyone is looking for Galina and Victor is under suspicion, if it were him, anyone would send at least a message to his missing friend. But Victor didn't do it. Obviously, he knew there would be no answer. Also in the case were sales receipts for 3 20-liter plastic buckets with lids and locks, bought the same day as the meat grinder. Unfortunately, there is no last name on the receipts, so it is not proven that it was Victor Cohen who bought them. But how could Galina fit into 3 20-liter buckets? Another piece of circumstantial evidence was the enamel in the bathroom. Victor dismembered Galina in the bathtub, having covered everything with foil to hide the traces of blood. He then scrubbed the tub with a metal brush with such force that he erased the enamel. In the confession video, Victor voiced that Galina had ruined the enamel on the bathtub by regularly cleaning it with alkaline or acidic products. Witnesses who claimed to have seen Galina at a supermarket in Vladivostok and at Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow after she went missing turned out to be false. According to the airport's CCTV cameras, a similar girl was not found. A criminal case was opened against one of the witnesses under the article on giving false testimony. While studying this case, the only and the main question was spinning in my head. So why were no other clues found? It is impossible to anticipate and hide even the smallest details. After all, if Victor really killed Galina, at least some traces must remain. And the answer was simple. It's time. For the first few days, Victor wouldn't let the police into his apartment. He immediately moved in with Tatyana, and the owners of the apartment knew nothing about what had happened. He finally took his belongings only on December 8th. No one opened the door to the police officer who came to check on him. The police did not get into the apartment until 12 days later. They did not use luminol, but simply fixed the situation. On December 10th, the owners of the apartment started renovation. The 2 cars were inspected only on December 27th. Let me remind you that Galina disappeared on November 14th. Consequently, Victor had about 3 weeks to clean the apartment and cover his tracks, and a month and a half to clean the interior of the car. Why, then, were neither traces of DNA nor Galina's remains found? According to the conclusion of experts, it is still possible to completely burn the body in artisanal conditions, and that's exactly what happened in this case. The black pieces, which Victor said he scattered in the forest near the place of burning, could be scattered by wild animals, thus depriving the investigation of the last possible evidence. Victor burned Galina, who had been dismembered into pieces, on tires, giving the right temperature to burn the bones. All that was left of her were black charred bone fragments. He did not specify the exact location of the bonfire, citing the long time lapse. He had forgotten. In order to find the remains of the body would have to sift through a sieve a huge area of the forest. But why, if the killer is found? For more than 13 years, nothing is known about Galina Kolyadzinskaya, and the last day of her life is described from the words of the man who was convicted for her murder. Assuming that Victor Cohen did not kill after all, where could Galina have gone? Experienced retired investigators in an informal conversation with journalists say that in today's world, it is almost impossible to get lost unless you are a professional in the intelligence service. In 13 years, Galina had to be found somehow. Even if she lived abroad under a false name, she could not help but leave traces. After all, even to replace her documents, she would have had to be fingerprinted, which means she would have been identified. Victor Cohen married someone else, claims torture, but never once mentions that Galina will definitely come back, that he is waiting for her, and she will definitely prove his innocence. But he knows perfectly well that the main witness is not there and cannot be. Not once did Victor say that he served time innocently, that 10 years of his life were stolen from him, that he lost his beloved wife Tatyana, who preferred not to wait for him from prison. He has no grudge against the system, no desire to fight for his honest name, to sue, to prove his innocence. He knows that the body will never be found. He burned it to the ground. There is no evidence. This gives him the opportunity to make up all these versions of the disappearance, and he behaves just as if he had served time for his crime. Now he is clean. What claims can there be? He was convicted. He served time. He has redeemed everything. An innocent person would not be so cold-blooded as to incriminate himself, and even in such detail. Despite the already closed case, many people all over the country still can't believe what happened. They are still looking for Galina on their own. For this purpose, they place ads on forums and periodically post photos of girls who resemble her very much, because Galina's parents are still waiting for her to come home. In February 2018, the quiet town of Deltona, located in eastern Florida off the Atlantic coast, was rocked by news of the brutal murder of a young man named Patrick Della Cerda. The 25-year-old man was found dead in his home, and the nature of his injuries suggested that the perpetrator had a personal grudge against him. The Patrick Della Cerda case is an example of an almost perfect, elaborate, and planned crime that may well have gone unsolved. Although the murderer was named almost immediately, no direct evidence was found to prove his guilt. As later claimed investigator Chad Weaver, who investigated the case, he realized from the beginning that it would be a real detective, worthy of screen adaptation. In fact, so it happened. Who is Patrick Della Cerda? Patrick Della Cerda was born in June 1992 in one of the most picturesque metropolitan areas, Miami, in the state of Florida. His father, Max Della Cerda, was a native of Spain, and his mother, Patricia Ronza, was born and raised in France, but in the 80s moved to the United States, where he soon married and gave birth to a son. Della Cerda family was very friendly and happy. Patrick grew up in an atmosphere of love, care, and mutual respect. He was a very kind, intelligent, and sociable guy, studied well in school, could easily become the soul of any company and chalk a lot of friends. And also the boy from childhood years was very close to his parents, who did not spare no effort and money to ensure that the son received a good education and grew up a worthy man. The head of the family worked all his life in the field of construction and was an excellent specialist in his field. The family was not rich, but was considered quite well-to-do by the standards of the big city. After graduating from high school, Patrick decided to enter the construction faculty to continue his father's work. When the young man was studying at university, his parents, after almost a quarter of a century of living together, decided to divorce. It should be noted that they parted very quietly and peacefully, without scandals, division of property, and the like. The mother moved to the quiet town of Deltona, located in the east of the state, where she soon remarried. The adult son decided to stay with his father in Miami, where they worked together and were respected and sought-after professionals in the construction industry. Despite the divorce of the parents, all family members remained very close and were friendly with each other. They were always in touch with each other, calling and communicating regularly, and were always ready to help when needed. Patrick regularly visited his mother in Deltona, told her about everything that was happening in his life, shared his joys and experiences. Meeting the girl of his dreams. Thanks to his French-Spanish roots, the young man from an early age had a bright appearance and enjoyed great success with the fair sex. but for him has always been an example of the family in which he grew up. So Patrick did not seek frivolous and fleeting affairs. He dreamed of a bright, mutual feeling and a strong family of his own. With the girl of his dreams, De La Cerda met by chance on the internet, on one of the popular sites where lonely hearts are looking for each other. He registered there and created an account on the advice of a friend, but he himself did not fully believe that it was really possible to meet his soulmate there. One June evening in 2017, without much enthusiasm, he was flipping through the profiles of girls on the site, as suddenly his attention was attracted by a photo which depicted a searing brunette with a rather unusual bright appearance. She had big, just bottomless eyes and a charming smile. Patrick was literally enchanted and decided to write to the beautiful stranger. She responded to his message, and a relaxed communication started between them. The girl's name was Jessica Devnani. She was born in 1988 in the city of Orlando, located in the central part of the state of Florida. After graduating from high school, she entered one of the local universities, where she studied banking, and after graduating, she got a job at a bank branch in her native Orlando. Jessica was also immediately attracted to the handsome young man. For a few days, they corresponded actively on the website and then decided to exchange phone numbers. For the next couple of weeks, they called each other every evening and talked for hours about everything. The couple quickly developed mutual sympathy and trust, so the young people decided to meet in real life. But since they lived in different parts of the state, they chose a place about halfway to each other for the meeting. Already on the first date, Patrick realized that Jessica was the girl he had been looking for so long, and whom he now does not want to let go. She also liked him immediately, and Jessica was a little confused by the age difference, because she was 4 years older than Patrick. On the way home, Patrick called his mother and told her that he had met the girl of his dreams, whom he wanted to marry and start a family. Patricia heard the joy and excitement in her son's voice, realized that he was serious, and was happy for him. This long-distance relationship lasted several months, and it was a big problem, because the couple could only see each other on weekends, somewhere neutral. Usually they rented a hotel room in some cozy, secluded place and just enjoyed each other's company. But on Sunday night, everyone flew back to their homes because they had to go to work on Monday morning. Marriage proposal. In December 2017, Patrick moved to Delton, where his mother lived, to be closer to his sweetheart. He bought a house there in a quiet neighborhood and began to carry out some repair work, preparing a cozy nest for the move of his chosen one. But Jessica could not yet so immediately leave work, and they planned a housewarming party for early spring next year. On the eve of the new year, which the couple met together, the young man decided to make his girlfriend a surprise. He arranged fireworks in the backyard of the house, and while Jessica admired the fireworks, got down on one knee and held out a box with a ring, asking her the most important question: will she become his lawful wife? Jessica was unspeakably happy, and of course answered him in agreement. Patrick admitted that he had been looking for a ring suitable for the engagement for a long time, but he had not found the perfect one in any of the jewelry stores. All of them seemed to him not beautiful and refined enough for such an occasion. He chose the best of what was available to be able to make a proposal before the new year, but ordered another one in the jewelry workshop, an exclusive ring, the design of which the young man came up with himself. Something had happened to Patrick. 2 months have passed since the engagement. Preparations for the wedding and the upcoming housewarming were in full swing. The couple's choice was approved by their parents, and they themselves were unspeakably happy, preparing for a new stage of their lives. The young people planned to arrange a lavish celebration in Miami, on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean, or in France, where the groom's mother was from. On February 27, 2018, Max de la Cerda, Patrick's father, received a call from a courier. The father's number was listed as an additional contact. The courier reported that his son's order was delivered to the specified address, but the customer does not open the door and does not answer the phone. This was very unlike Patrick, so the father immediately got worried, but since he was at work at that moment and could not go to pick up the order, and at the same time to check if everything was all right with his son, Max decided to ask his future daughter-in-law. He called Jessica, and with anxiety in his voice said that he couldn't reach his son. Jessica herself had been trying to contact her fiancé since morning, but he didn't answer messages and calls. When she mentioned this to Patrick's father, Max pronounced, "Something must have happened to Patrick." Jessica immediately dropped everything she was doing and headed to the groom's house as fast as she could. When she pulled up, she immediately saw Patrick's car in the driveway, which indicated that he hadn't gone anywhere. Since she had her own key, Jessica entered the yard and called out loudly to her lover several times, but there was no response. Jessica carefully opened the front door and saw a horrifying picture. Her fiancé was lying practically at the entrance, in a pool of his own blood. He showed no signs of life. Jessica immediately rushed to call the emergency services, but the paramedics who arrived on the scene were unable to help Patrick and only declared him dead. By the time the police arrived, a distraught Jessica was sobbing in the backyard of the house where Patrick had proposed 2 months earlier. When one of the officers approached her, she only looked at him and told him she knew who had massacred her lover and ruined her entire life. A rich and powerful ex-boyfriend. To understand this difficult case, and to understand who could want to kill a young guy who at first glance had neither enemies nor ill wishers, you need to go back a little bit, at the time when he and Jessica just met. The thing is that, at that time, the girl was in a relationship with a certain Gregory Bender, a wealthy businessman who owned his own investment fund. Jessica met Gregory in her student years. He was 20 years older than her, and he literally turned the young beauty's head. The businessman wooed her beautifully, gave her expensive gifts, and took her to fancy resorts. Jessica thought she had found her one and only love, but soon she began to notice some oddities in his behavior. Gregory sought to control his girlfriend in everything, closely watched where she goes and with whom she communicates. If Jessica had an admirer, he immediately got rid of him through threats and intimidation. At the same time, he told her almost nothing about himself. This relationship lasted almost 8 years, and during this time, Gregory never introduced his chosen one to his family or friends. They met, spent time together, or went on vacation only when he wanted it, and Gregory rarely invited his girlfriend to his house. He himself argued that he was very busy. Naturally, Jessica wanted to have a normal family, to have children, but Bender said every time that it was not yet time for that. And when she tried to break off the relationship, Gregory gave her a ring and asked her to marry him. Jessica accepted, but nothing had changed. They still lived apart and saw each other only when the groom said so. One day, Gregory was in a car accident and ended up in a hospital bed. When Jessica heard about it, she rushed to him, but beforehand she decided to stop by his house to get some things for Gregory. There, Jessica ran into a woman she had never seen before and asked who she was. The stranger, instead of answering, asked her a similar question. Jessica showed the ring on her finger and said that she was the bride of the owner of the house. The woman then laughed and showed her ring, stating that she was Bender's legal wife, Demora Sanchez Bender. After such a shocking revelation, Jessica decided to immediately part ways with the businessman who had cheated her for so many years. However, the boyfriend began to literally pursue Jessica, begging her to return, promising that he would divorce Demora in the near future, and then they could get married. She once again believed this man, but time passed, and nothing in their relationship did not change. Finally tired of this affair, Jessica filled out a questionnaire on a dating site, where she soon met Patrick. After starting to communicate with him, she firmly decided to break up with Gregory, about which she informed him, but he did not want to let her go. Obsessive stalker. At first, Bender simply persuaded Jessica to come back to him and try to start over, once again promising to divorce his wife. Then he moved on to threats and harassment, and when he realized that all this is useless, decided to search for a rival, about which at that time exactly knew nothing. He had to turn to professionals to hack into Jessica's account and find out who she was communicating with. After finding out who Patrick was and obtaining his contacts, Gregory began sending him threatening messages and demanding that he break up with Jessica, calling her his fiancée. Patrick did not react to the threats and was absolutely calm, believing that the matter would not go further than threats. But Jessica was scared because she realized that her ex-boyfriend could expect anything from her. He was a man with a lot of money and connections, and he had a huge collection of firearms that he could use. Jessica offered Patrick to break up before anyone got hurt, but he wouldn't even hear of it. Then they decided to go to the police, providing evidence that Bender was stalking and threatening them. The couple managed to get a restraining order for Gregory to approach them and try to make contact by any means. Gregory was also required to surrender all firearms stored in his home. Things calmed down for a while, and the lovers began to think that the stalker had left them alone. However, Jessica convinced Patrick that it was necessary to install CCTV cameras around and inside the house because she feared that Gregory might violate the ban. A crime scene inspection, and the first theory. But let's go back to the tragic events of February 27, 2018. During the initial examination of the crime scene, criminalists immediately ruled out the version of robbery and noted that, judging by the nature of the mutilation, this murder had a personal motive, and the perpetrator literally hated his victim. On the body of a 25-year-old guy counted 4 gunshot wounds, in the thigh, in the chest, and 2 in the head. In addition, the experts found injuries and bruises characteristic of a fall from a ladder. The body itself was lying on the floor between the front door and the stairs leading to the second floor. Investigators speculated that the killer had most likely snuck into the house and was waiting for the owner on the second floor. When an unsuspecting Patrick went inside and climbed the stairs, the intruder stepped out to meet him and fired the first bullet into his thigh. The wounded young man rolled down the stairs, and the perpetrator followed him down, fired another bullet into his chest, and then finished the victim off with 2 follow-up shots to the head. The murder weapon was not found, but it was a rather rare model of pistol, which was not easy to obtain. The first shell casing was found on the second floor of the house. 2 more similar shell casings were found downstairs, but the 4th shell casing was not there, so it was assumed that the perpetrator took it away with him, perhaps as a trophy. Despite Jessica's words that she knows who killed her fiancé, the first under suspicion was the neighbor of the murdered man, with whom they had a serious conflict a couple of months ago. The man was a combat participant and a veteran of the U.S. Army, was wounded and severely concussed in the war, against which he developed a mental disorder. He was excellent with firearms and could easily get a rare model of gun. In December 2017, the veteran mistook his new neighbor for a burglar and opened fire. Luckily, no one was hurt at the time, but the neighbor was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital due to an exacerbation of his disorder. After he returned home, he constantly followed Patrick, called him a spy, and promised to bring him out in the open. The mentally ill neighbor could indeed have a motive created by his unhealthy imagination, so the man was detained and decided to interrogate. He made no secret of his intense dislike for Patrick, but at the time of the murder itself, he had a 100% alibi, which was confirmed by several people. Searching for evidence and trying to provoke the perpetrator. So, the version of the robbery from the very beginning canceled, because in the house everything was in its place and the money and valuables remained untouched. Only hard disks with recordings made by video surveillance cameras were missing, so it was impossible to trace who entered and left the house that day. In addition, no evidence at all was found at the crime scene. Forensic experts could not find a single fingerprint, shoe print, or DNA trace. The murder was carefully thought out and planned, and although the investigation had little doubt that Gregory was behind it all, it seemed at the time that he could get away with it. The police decided to go on the sly and asked Jessica to call her former lover and bring him to a frank conversation. Jessica agreed without hesitation. She dialed Bender's number and made a spectacle of herself. She blamed him for what had happened, cried, and kept asking why he'd done it. But Gregory seemed to have figured out what the investigators were up to from the start, and persisted in pretending he didn't understand. When Jessica said that he killed her fiancé, the businessman pretended to be surprised by this news, and after expressed his condolences to the ex-girlfriend. To get Gregory to confess, to make him mad, or to force him to commit a blunder never succeeded. The police had no reason to detain or question the man. He could only be called to testify. But he honored the restraining order and seemed to have let the ex-girlfriend go long ago. The killer's notes. While the investigation was treading water, trying to find any clues, the police received a call from Daimora Sanchez Bender, saying that she had important information about the Patrick de la Cerda case. The woman was immediately invited to the station for an interview, where she said that shortly before the crime she saw a strange notebook on her husband's desk in his office. Looking into it, Demora found a detailed plan of some stranger's house, and next to it, there was a strange algorithm of actions. She hadn't paid any attention to it at the time, but when Demora saw a news report about the brutal murder of a young man, and the story showed the plan of his house, she immediately remembered the sketches of her unfaithful husband, with whom she was on the verge of divorce, and decided to tell the investigators. This information gave the police enough reason to search the house of the alleged perpetrator. The mysterious notebook, about which the wife of the businessman spoke, was found in the office, but the pages with the plan of the house and other records were removed. However, they were soon found in the office, but in a trash can that Gregory had apparently failed or forgotten to empty. He had simply ripped out the pages, crumpled them up, and tossed them in the trash. Apparently, he was confident that his house would not be searched, since there was no evidence against him. On the sheets of paper, in addition to the layout of the house, there was a detailed plan of the crime itself. It became clear that the criminal had prepared long and thoroughly, working out every point. In particular, it was said about the need to turn off the phone, use gloves, and lubricate the soles of shoes with a special compound so that it did not leave traces on the floor. From the records, it became clear that Gregory followed his victim, knew what time Patrick returned home, and was aware of the presence of surveillance cameras in the house and yard. In addition, Gregory made sure to dispose of the crime weapon, dirty clothes, shoes, and gloves. He was only let down by the fact that his own records had not been destroyed in time and his wife's curiosity. In addition, a fourth missing shell casing was found on the table, in a cigar box, which the gunman was supposed to have carried off as a trophy. Forensics confirmed that it was the exact same shell casing from the crime scene. The trial and the defense attorney's attempts to shift the blame to Jessica. The evidence was enough to arrest Gregory and initiate a trial. But the main problem was that all the evidence found could be called circumstantial because the crime weapon was never found. There was no evidence that the accused had ever been to the victim's house, and there were no witnesses. Bender's trial did not begin until May 2021, more than 3 years after his atrocity. During this time, he hired the best lawyers who had time to thoroughly prepare for the case. The businessman was optimistic and seemed to believe that he would get away with it. Jessica was a key witness. She detailed her relationship with Gregory over many years, how she learned he was married and tried to break up with him, as well as the harassment and threats he made against her and Patrick. As evidence, she provided saved screenshots of correspondence as well as phone records. In response, Bender's attorneys attempted to shift all the blame onto Jessica. The defense stated that Jessica herself provoked Gregory with her behavior because she registered on a dating site and started a new relationship, not yet broken up with Gregory, which hurt his pride and ego. Also, Jessica was accused of mercantilism, noting that she liked to receive expensive gifts from a rich suitor. The main evidence, sheets with records of the murder plan, the lawyers called only a fantasy of a wounded man who wanted to take revenge on his rival. At the same time, the defense insisted that the defendant did not go further than plans and fantasies, so his traces of the scene of the crime were not found. In addition, according to the lawyers, the search in the house of their client was illegal and was conducted with violations, and therefore the second evidence, a shell casing, he could simply plant it in the process. The crime weapon was also not found, and the model of the gun Jessica identified from a picture, saying that she had previously seen it in the collection of her boyfriend. But she could be wrong, because she was not well versed in weapons. Ex-wife testimony and final judgment. At one of the sessions, the defendant's now ex-wife, Demora Sanchez, was called as a witness. The man, who had hitherto looked indifferent, suddenly became animated and unexpectedly confessed his love for her. The ex-wife was moved by this confession and apparently changed her mind about testifying against Gregory. She confused her testimony, citing her forgetfulness, and finally added that she had lived with the man for many years and doubted that he was capable of murder. Despite attempts by defense attorneys to challenge the legality of the search of the defendant's home, Despite his ex-wife's unexpected statement, and despite the lack of direct evidence, the jury, after hours of deliberation, still found Gregory Bender guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, barring him from ever being eligible for parole. As the judge read out the sentence, the defendant stared at Jessica intently, seemingly without even blinking. He was literally glaring at her, which made her feel sick and almost had a panic attack. She sat next to her late fiancé's mother and at one point began sobbing and literally choking. Despite numerous attempts by Bender and his highly paid lawyers to appeal the verdict and get the case reviewed, all of their appeals were rejected. Not the least role in this played a wide resonance of the case in society, because a wealthy millionaire businessman in cold blood massacred a simple working man and tried to get away with it. The story of Patrick de la Cerda was widely covered in the press. With Gregory Bender still behind bars at the moment, Jessica Devnani says she feels safe and continues to live for Patrick and keep his memory alive. She wears the ring he gave her as a gift, as well as that exclusive piece of jewelry Patrick never got around to giving her. Jessica maintains a close relationship with her deceased fiancé's parents, who treat her like their own daughter.
Is it possible to steal a twin's identity and live their life? Twins are almost always of keen interest to others when they appear somewhere together. Not surprisingly, they have also always been the subject of intense scrutiny for scientific research as well. Such research is considered key in studying the genetics of their behavior from biology to psychology. Many twins claim to feel the mood, condition, and sometimes even physical pain of their brother or sister, even when they are far away. Sometimes they even repeat the fate of each other. A special connection have identical twins because they appear as a result of division of one fertilized egg. They not only have a strong external resemblance, but even their fingerprints are very similar in the type of pattern and the number of lines, although the detailed pattern, of course, differs. The story of twin sisters Sunny and Gina Khan looks like a script for a thriller or even a horror movie, except that it happened in real life. The girls were separated in early childhood, and later they were reunited. But instead of joy, they were seized by a strange feeling that grew into envy and constant rivalry in everything. Each of the girls considered her sister to be more successful and lucky, and the constant striving to be better at any cost resulted in a real tragedy. Sisters Sunny and Gina Han. April 30th, 1974, in a simple family living in one of the provinces of South Korea, were born twin daughters who were given the names Sunny and Gina. Spouses Han lived modestly, if not to say poorly, and the appearance of their two children seriously undermined the family budget. Parents constantly scandalized, and when the girls were not yet 2 years old, decided to separate. In this case, the children during the divorce process, they simply shared. Father took Gina and went to a neighboring city, and the mother with Sunny remained in her native province. The former spouses did not communicate for almost 4 years, and all this time the sisters also did not see each other. However, in 1980, Mr. Khan met with a woman who decided to marry and create a family, but his new lover immediately disliked Gina. The woman put the question on the edge and forced the man to return the child to his mother, agreeing to become his wife only in this case. In the fall of the same year, he brought the girl to his ex-wife and just left her there without going into explanations and without even paying attention to the situation in the house. Then he left and never took any further interest in the fate of his children, nor did he help them financially. The mother of the girls by that time had serious problems with alcohol, had no stable job, and was addicted to gambling, which caused her to incur huge debts. The woman could leave home for days at a time, leaving her daughters alone with a pack of cheap convenience foods, or even no food at all. They were hungry, afraid, and seemed to have no one else in the world but each other. Nevertheless, the sisters' relationship was rapidly deteriorating. They began to fight over literally everything and constantly competed for their mother's attention. Often their quarrels ended in fierce fights with bruises, abrasions, and torn pieces of hair. The mother never separated her daughters or tried to reconcile them. As she herself said in an interview many years later, fights between siblings were considered normal in Korea, so she did not intervene. Escape to the United States of America. In the early 1980s, Mrs. Hahn, unable to pay off her mounting debts and fearing for her life and the safety of her girls, decided to flee the country to the ocean to escape creditors and try to make a fresh start. The woman wanted to go to the sunny state of California, which she had only seen in pictures and magazines. She packed only the bare necessities in her suitcase and bought one-way tickets for herself and her children. They settled in Irvine, a city in Orange County, California, and immediately faced a host of problems. They had no friends, acquaintances, or relatives to help them in any way. Mrs. Hahn did not know English and therefore could not get a job, and the girls, without knowledge of the language, had a very difficult time in school. The family was barely making ends meet, living on a meager allowance, and the future seemed ghostly and frightening. It took several years for the mother and children to adapt to the new place, but when life seemed to be getting better, the woman became addicted to alcohol and gambling again. The situation repeated itself, but now she also began to show mental disorders. She was unable to raise her own daughters and wanted to put them in an orphanage or foster home. In 1986, Mrs. Hahn's sister moved to California with her husband. The couple had no children of their own, and after learning about the situation in the family of a relative, she herself offered her to take the 12-year-old girls to her for upbringing. Mrs. Hahn accepted the offer gladly, but did not even talk to her daughters about it. She quickly packed their belongings in a suitcase, took a bus to Sonny and Gina in a neighboring town, and simply dropped them off at the bus stop at her sister's house, telling them where to go. The girls were confused, scared, but they were welcomed with open arms at their aunt's house.
And soon their lives began to resemble a fairy tale. Auntie and her husband did everything they could to make the sisters feel comfortable and in need of nothing. Sonny and Gina ate enough for the first time in their lives, wore beautiful new clothes, and attended a prestigious school where they were taken by car. Nevertheless, not only did the relationship between the sisters not improve,
but it escalated to the breaking point. They studied together in the same class and constantly competed in everything. The girls were the best students, and each of them tried to bypass her sister in this. They also played sports, trying to perform better than their sister, shared friends, competed for the attention of teachers and guardians, and liked boys. This rivalry seemed to really stimulate and spur the sisters on, pushing them to be the best at everything. They did become the best students in their school, showed high performance in sports, were meticulous about their appearance, and were an example to others. The only thing that never happened between them was love. Each of the sisters thought that the second sister got the best, so she did not want to fall behind and give in.
it should be noted that Sonny was more open, friendly, and communicative, so it was easier for her to make friends or relationships with boys. Teachers treated her better, and guardians, without realizing it, showed more tenderness and care to her. But Gina seemed to be driven by anger and hatred. She would go out of her way to beat her sister and prove to everyone that she was better.
From the army to the alcoholic to the gambler. After high school, the sisters' paths diverged. Gina decided that she could realize herself as a soldier and signed a 4-year contract, joining the U.S. Air Force. The girl was hardy, well-prepared physically, but she soon realized that the military service she did not like at all. Here reigned strict discipline and order. Orders were not discussed, and the soldier did not actually belong to himself. After a year, she made her first attempt to break the contract, but she failed. After another 6 months, she went on a deception, saying that her father was seriously ill and she needed to take care of him. The management demanded proof in the form of a medical certificate, which of course she could not get anywhere. So, another 6 months or so passed, and Gina was literally suffocating without any personal freedom. Her unit was transferred to Lackland Air Force Base, located in Bexar County, Texas. It is the only place for the U.S. Air Force and Space Force enlisted for basic military training. In addition, Lackland is best known as the only military training location for the U.S. Air Force. Many people dream of going here, but for Han, this base seemed like a real prison. Gina didn't want to wait another 2 years for her contract to expire, so she decided to cheat again. She went to a senior officer and informed him about her unconventional orientation. It should be noted that it was 1994, and at that time such a scandalous statement was a good reason for immediate termination of the contract. Freed from her obligations, Gina returned back to California, and settled in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Pretty 20-year-old girl quickly found a job in one of the popular casinos with a salary of about $20,000 a year. The sum was small even for that time, but tips sometimes exceeded her daily earnings several times over. For a while, it seemed that Gina's life was getting better. She was making good money, could afford to buy clothes and cosmetics in brand-name stores, rented a place in a good neighborhood, and had her own, albeit used, car. But that didn't last long. Soon, she became addicted to hot drinks and began to use them almost daily. But that wasn't the worst of it. One day, Cohen, after a work shift, after picking up her paycheck and receiving a decent amount as a tip, decided to try her luck and sat down at a slot machine. Within a couple of hours, she lost all the money she had earned. But instead of regret, she woke up a real painful excitement. She wanted to win back and hit the jackpot. Every day, after the end of the shift, she drank and sat down at the machines where she lost all the money. At first, she gambled only her paycheck and tips, but soon she began borrowing money from colleagues and friends, which caused her to get into debt. Gina did not realize that she was repeating the fate of her mother, who also had a problem with alcohol and gambling, and for this reason, the woman once left her native country, fleeing to America with 2 children in her arms. Gina's addictions worsened. Soon she stopped lending money because she simply did not pay them back, and she descended into banal theft. For the first time, she stole cash from the purse of her colleague, but the latter, having discovered the loss, felt sorry for Han and did not report her to the police. When the situation was repeated, the thief was brought to administrative responsibility, but she got off with only a fine and a suspended sentence. A few months later, she stole her aunt who raised her, visiting her. In mid-1995, Gina was convicted of theft and for the first time received a real sentence, going to prison for 3 months, but got out early after less than a month. After that, she was in the sight of the police a couple more times for drunken debauchery, but spent no more than a few days behind bars. Successful twin. Sunny went to college after high school and then became a student at a prestigious university. She studied law, received a scholarship, made a lot of successful and wealthy friends, revolved in high society circles, and lived that annoyingly perfect life, which these days brag on social networks. She rented a spacious apartment in a luxury apartment complex with its own swimming pool and gym, located in an upscale neighborhood. Sunny shared the rent with her close friend and fellow student Helena Smith, who was the heiress of very wealthy parents. Han had her own expensive white BMW car, and she was dating a handsome and promising young man from an intelligent family who was studying at medical school and dreamed of a career as a surgeon. It seemed that she was the complete opposite of her sister, achieved everything she dreamed of, and a long and happy life was ahead of her. About her twin sister, Sunny almost did not remember. They have not seen and did not communicate since graduation from high school. She knew from her aunt's words that Gina had already been in jail a couple of times for theft, had problems with alcohol, and got into debt because of gambling. The girl was too busy with her studies, relationships, and building her perfect life. She did not try to find her sister, somehow contact her, and offer help. However, in early 1996, Gina unexpectedly contacted her sister and asked for help. Is it possible to misappropriate someone else's life? In April 1996, Gina called Sunny and asked to see her. The sisters saw each other for the first time in 4 years, but did not feel any joy about it. They sat across from each other in a cafe, and the people around them did not take their eyes off them, because it seemed like one person sitting in front of a mirror. Gina complained to her sister that she was in serious trouble and didn't know what to do. Gina was unemployed, but with a lot of debt. She had nowhere to live and no one to turn to. Sunny listened carefully to her sister and genuinely felt sorry for her. She suggested that Gina stay in her apartment for the time being, without even consulting Helena. The same day, Gina moved into her sister's apartment with only a bag and her belongings. Of course, Gina had heard that Sunny was not poor, but she had not expected to see such a luxurious and cozy apartment in a comfortable residential complex, where there was everything one could dream of. Naturally, Gina did not pay for the apartment, and for more than a month she simply lived at her sister's expense. Every day she was more and more eaten up by envy and hatred. She constantly thought about how her life could have turned out. How was her sister better than her? At this time, Gina had a seemingly crazy thought. After all, she and Sonny were identical in appearance, and no one but her mother and aunt had ever distinguished them. Gina wondered, what if the twin just disappeared, and she could live her perfect life? In her opinion, no one would even notice the switch, as well as the disappearance of Gina herself, who had almost no friends, and her relatives frankly disliked her. Soon, such thoughts turned into an obsession. Gradually, an insidious plan matured in Gina's mind. She carefully watched with whom her sister communicates, where she goes, how she speaks and dresses, exactly copied her hair, makeup, and demeanor. Gina tried to socialize with her sister's friends as much as possible to learn more about them so they wouldn't notice the switch. The sisters still did not find common ground and constantly quarreled. As the main argument, Sonny threatened to evict her sister every time, but since she had nowhere else to go, she just gave up and stored up her hatred. On August 18, 1996, after another scandal, Gina had been drinking, and while her sister and a neighbor went somewhere else, she went through the apartment and, taking all the cash found there, went to the casino. When Sonny and Helena returned home, they found the place a mess and the money missing. They immediately realized what had happened and went to the police because they could no longer tolerate the antics of Gina. The girl was arrested the same night right in the casino. She was found guilty and sent to prison for 6 months, but after 2 months, the conditions of her imprisonment were relaxed, and the convict could leave the prison for 6 hours a day to go to work, but had to return to the prison at night. She complied for 2 weeks, and then decided to escape to complete her plan, an insidious plot. Once free, Gina hitchhiked back to Orange County. She was not a dangerous criminal, so the search for her was not a full-time endeavor. Since Gina had no money, she was forced to spend the night in a homeless shelter in a very disadvantaged neighborhood. She wanted to kill her sister as soon as possible and take her place, but she couldn't do it alone, and it was impossible to hire a hitman on credit. Then Gina recruited 2 local teenagers, whom she met in the same troubled neighborhood. They turned out to be Archie Bryant and his buddy Joni Syrat. The girl promised to pay each of them $100 in case of success. The guys prepared for the crime thoroughly, bought rope, duct tape, and even somewhere got a gun, which however was not loaded, but could be used for intimidation. On November 15, 1996, Gina, having borrowed money from acquaintances, rented a used Ford Mustang, on which she and her accomplices were to go to her sister's house. All was to happen on Wednesday, November 20th in the afternoon, when Sonny, according to the calculations of her sister, would definitely be home alone. And to make a reconnaissance, and to make sure of it, the intruders bought a pack of magazines so that Johnny, under the guise of a salesman, would look into the apartment and check who was inside. The plan seemed flawless, the roles were written, and each of the criminal trio knew what he had to do. But suddenly everything went wrong, as they had originally intended. A failed assassination attempt. On the appointed day, around noon, a Mustang pulled up to the apartment complex where Sonny lived and 2 guys got out. Archie stealthily stood aside while Johnny went with the magazines to the victim's apartment. He knocked, and the door was opened by Sonny, who however did not bother to knock, and saying she didn't want anything, simply slammed the door in his face. Johnny went back to his assistants, told them everything, and they discussed the details of the plan once more. Somehow, no one had any doubts that the girl might not have been home alone, only because she had opened the door herself without calling anyone. Having finished discussing the nuances, the young men took the rope, duct tape, and gun from the car and went back to the apartment. Around 1 o'clock, Johnny called the apartment again, and Archie stood a little ways away, preparing to kick the door down as soon as Sonny opened it. By then, however, Sonny had gone to take a shower because she was about to leave for an important meeting. Her neighbor was sitting in the living room in front of the TV, and when she heard the bell ring, she didn't even want to open the door. But the unexpected visitor was persistent, so after a couple minutes, Smith gave up and headed for the door. As soon as the lock clicked and the door began to open, the guys, without ceremony, kicked it out, knocked the girl to the floor, and only then realized that it was not Sonny in front of them. Threatening with a gun, they tied Helena up, duct taped her mouth shut, and then Johnny ran to Gina to ask her how to handle the situation and whether to let the witness live. He took with him a bank card lying on the dresser in Sonny's name. At this time, Sonny, still in the bathroom, heard a noise and cautiously peeked out. She decided that burglars had broken into the house, grabbed the cell phone in the hallway, and went back into the bathroom and started calling the emergency services. All she had time to do was give the address and tell them about the armed robbery when the connection was suddenly cut off, and the door to the room swung open with a powerful kick. Archie pulled a terrified Sonny out by the hair, tied her up with rope, taped her mouth shut, and threw her on the floor next to a bound Helena. The friends expected to be tortured to find out where the money and valuables were in the house, or to be abused, but just a few minutes later the police arrived. Johnny and Gina were still in the Mustang when the police arrived at the house. First, 3 law enforcement officers ran past them, and a few minutes later another car came to help. Since it was a hostage situation, all forces were rushed to the call. A police officer who was running by was radioed the number of the apartment, and this was heard by the intruders sitting in the car. Gina got out of the car and yelled that she was Sonny Hahn. The law enforcer looked at her but didn't understand what that said. He asked her to wait and ran to the scene, where his colleagues had already managed to disarm the attacker and rescue the hostages. When the police officer entered the apartment, he was shocked and bewildered. In front of him, frightened and crying, sat the same girl he had just run past on the street. He asked her name, and when she said her name was Sonny Khan, the police officer doubted for a moment that what was happening was real. He thought he was going crazy, because the same person could not be in 2 places at the same time. The man, telling his colleague that he needed to check something, jumped back into the yard, but the Ford Mustang with the girl and her accomplice had already disappeared. The good twin and the bad twin? When Gina saw the police arriving and heard the apartment number being called on the radio, she realized that the attempt had failed. Then she took a desperate step, jumping out of the car and identifying herself by her sister's name. The girl wanted to make herself look like a victim, saying that the real criminal is now in her apartment, but the hurried officer simply did not listen to her and only asked to wait. Naturally, Gina did not wait. She and Johnny went to the nearest ATM, where they were able to withdraw a few $1,000s from her sister's stolen card. And then the criminals rushed towards the Mexican border, but first they needed to change their car for something less conspicuous. At the car dealership, Gina introduced herself with her sister's name, but when filling out the paperwork, she made the mistake of writing her real name. The employees thought this was very strange and asked her to wait for a while to settle the formalities, then informed the management, and they called the police. When arrested, Gina continued to insist that Sonny was her, and the other sister was pretending to be her. The identity of each of the girls was established only by fingerprints, but even after that, at the investigation and in the courtroom, they both continued to introduce themselves as Sonny Khan. At first glance, the Khan sisters seemed to be typical good and bad twins, but a deeper examination of their history revealed that this was not the case at all. While Gina suffered from addictions, regularly got into trouble, and had several criminal records, Sonny built a happy and successful life. However, after the sisters' paths diverged, and they stopped constantly competing with each other, Sonny lost her main incentive. She entered a prestigious university, but in the second year of her academic performance began to fall, and the girl lost her scholarship. To be able to pay for her studies, she got a job as a dancer in one of the nightclubs in the neighboring city, and carefully hid it from her friends and boyfriend. Sonny tried to maintain a picture of an ideal life, which in reality she was no longer living. Trial and sentencing. Gina and her minor accomplices were charged with conspiracy to murder Sonny Khan. The girl was also accused of trying to take the identity of her twin sister, whose name she introduced herself even during the hearing. In general, watching the process was curious and creepy at the same time, because the sisters, being on the same emotional wave, simultaneously began to cry, experienced panic attacks, and at one of the sessions simultaneously lost consciousness. Gina claimed she didn't intend to kill her sister at all, but only wanted to get her belongings out of her apartment. Archie and Johnny were supposed to help her with that, but the guys decided to play gangsters and scare Sonny and her neighbor, but a little too much. The defendants pointed out that the gun was not loaded, so no real harm would have been done to the girls. On November 20th, 1997, a year after the attempted murder, the court reached its verdict. The jury took into account that Gina was previously convicted multiple times, escaped from prison, and at the time of this crime was wanted. Taking all of this into account, Gina Cohen was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 26 years in prison. Her accomplices Archie Bryant and Jonia Sairat received 14 and 8 years respectively, the aftermath and cultural reflection of the case. In May 2018, a California state commission granted Gina's attorney's petition, and she was released after serving 21 years. It is worth noting that she received support from Sonny in the matter of parole, because her sister was able to forgive her. Once free, Gina moved into the house of her elderly mother, whom she now takes care of. The story of the Cohen sisters was widely covered in the press, became a topic for numerous issues of popular talk shows, and also formed the basis of a number of documentaries and feature films.
Think of a scene from any movie in which the protagonist is running away from pursuit, but in the last seconds, when he is already safe, the villain's foot stops the closing door and the protagonist turns into a vulnerable victim. A young woman's morning began like this scene. She found herself trapped. We all know that in a state, law must always prevail. Not religion, not tradition, but the defense of human rights and freedom. However, some attitudes formed many years ago and stereotypes from childhood, imposed by society, affect the woman, and under the influence of unspoken rules, she continues to live with a tyrant and tolerates violence. Today, our reality is such that even in the modern world, these attitudes are still relevant and continue to change people's lives. Today, we will move to Central Asia, namely to Kyrgyzstan, and look at the customs and lives of people of the state with the oldest history. Kyrgyzstan is a country rich in natural beauty. After all, 3/4 of the country are mountains. Almost all of its territory is located within 2 mountain systems. The overwhelming majority of believers in Kyrgyzstan are Muslims. There are Christians, Orthodox, Catholics, and various Protestant movements. At the same time, Kyrgyzstan is a secular state. It is a state with a system where religion is separated from state power and which is regulated on the basis of civil rather than religious norms. The country's authorities punish members of the clergy for performing religious rituals that contradict the laws of the republic. But in the case of one fragile young woman who begged for help from the state and asked for protection, the authorities showed complete indifference. Asel Nogobayeva was born in 1986 in the city of Tokmak, Chue Oblast, Kyrgyzstan. After finishing school, the girl finished hairdressing courses and moved to Bishkek to find a job in a salon. It is easy to get lost in a large city, but sometimes it is much easier to meet people there. One day, Azamat Estebesov came to the hairdresser's shop where Asel worked to get a new haircut. He liked the pretty, slender girl very much, and he invited her for a cup of fragrant coffee. The meeting became fateful for both of them. After all, Azamat also liked Asel very much. He seemed to be a simple, attentive man who was brought up in a prosperous family and was very hard-working. Asel's family approved of her daughter's choice because Azamat was very religious and honored Muslim traditions. Asel's parents did not see the disadvantages of the groom and with a calm heart blessed the marriage. At the age of 19, Asel married her beloved Azamat. Soon the firstborn child was born in the young family. A boy. It would seem that every man dreams of an heir, of someone who will continue the family. But in our story, the joy of fatherhood, as if a genie from a jug, caused the lowly and cruel demons of Azamat. So, on an ordinary evening, a simple family story turned into a real drama, which provoked a whole series of sad events. Asel and Azamat were bathing their son. The inexperienced father accidentally poured too much water on the child. He shook with fright and cried a lot. Asel reacted rudely and shouted at her husband. Azamat did not hesitate to hit her in the face in response. That same evening, Asel and the child went to her mother's house. Azamat repented and asked for forgiveness. He begged and said that this would never happen again. It is worth noting that the Kyrgyz mentality is very different from other mentalities. From childhood, girls are taught patience. A husband should be alone for the rest of his life because divorce is not welcomed, although it is not forbidden, and the Muslim religion plays an important role in creating and preserving a family by any means. Knowing the traditions and customs of the Turkic family, Asel, who herself grew up without a father, did not want her son to repeat her fate. The girl believed that Azamat raised his hand for the first and last time, and they would be able to continue living happily. Asil came back, but she was mistaken. A year later, the family returned from Bishkek to her native Tokmak to live near her parents. The return was joyful because Asel was expecting her second child. Asel was walking with her son on the playground near her home and met several classmates. They said hello and had a nice conversation. However, returning home from the walk, Asel again received a strong blow to the face. The blow was so strong that she fell and slipped on the linoleum. Unfortunately, this blow and fall triggered a miscarriage. After moving to Tokmak, Azamat became Asel's shadow. He stealthily followed her on the street. He was constantly looking for a reason for new conflicts. The man got a taste for it and could no longer refrain from beating her. Only his outer shell remained of the kind and attentive Azamat, although Asel had changed because his gaze was filled with anger and hatred. Asil has resigned herself to living under total control for the sake of her children. After all, she had another son again. The beatings did not stop for years. Asil's mother, knowing about her daughter's family drama, could not stand it and took her to her home. But the man did not stop. He came again and again for his family and begged for forgiveness, promising that this would not happen again. Tradition intervened again because in Kyrgyzstan, a son must grow up with his father. Such are the rules. Asel ended up going back 5 times. Life became a nightmare for Asel and she was tired of enduring it. After each day of painful beatings, she went to the police in the hope of getting help. But there is no criminal sentence for domestic violence in Kyrgyzstan. The maximum that was applied to Azamat was 3 days in the isolation center. Then he came back again, and this nightmare continued over and over again for 6 years. Azamat did not even want to hear about divorce. He threatened that if his wife filed for divorce, he would find her, the children and her family, and kill them all. During the period of the worst beatings, Asel's family took her to Italy. In Italy, Asel had big plans. She settled in with her brother, who helped her find a job. She worked 3 jobs, a nurse, a cleaner, and she walked dogs. The woman worked without weekends to save money for an apartment, to become financially independent, and to leave her tyrant husband. After 3.5 years, she had already saved enough money to buy an apartment and open a mini business. During the years in Italy, Asel saw a lot of new things. She communicated with interesting people, and gradually her moral state recovered. But her maternal heart ached for her children. After all, she had to leave them for long 3 years, for the sake that they had a bright future ahead of them. The woman knew that the father never beat the children and did not show aggression towards them, so she was calm about it. But when she returned from Italy, a bleak picture awaited her. The children were living in terrible conditions. In one small room they slept, ate, played, and even went to the bathroom. The children did not go to school or for walks. They didn't eat well. And again, tradition. Azamat raised real Turkic men and created truly harsh conditions for their existence. Instead of school, they attended a madrasa, a Muslim religious and educational institution where they learn religion and how to read the Quran. Asel took the children. Azamat did not mind. It would seem that she was saved from the cruel captivity, but Azamat began to pursue his Asael again. He called and offered to meet her. Asil was categorical and made it clear that in case of harassment she would file a police report. But this did not stop him. In the evening, Asil went to the store to get some dishwashing detergent. The store was very close by. On her way, she met Azamat, who was following her again. He grabbed her and threatened her with a knife and took her to a dark, remote place. There, right on the street, he brutally beat Asel and took advantage of her. The strange sounds were noticed by passers-by who called the police. On September 1st, 2022, Asel wrote a statement to the police on her ex-husband about rape. He was detained and a criminal case was opened. Asel's family was sure that he would go to trial and the torment for all of them would end. But no. Azamat's family became active and could not accept that their son was a tyrant. Azamat's mother and sisters repeatedly begged Asel to withdraw the application. Another strange tradition. A woman in Kyrgyzstan cannot report her husband because it is a great shame. To beat, humiliate, and rape a woman is not shameful. Azamat's relatives discouraged Asel as much as they could. By deception, they succeeded. Asel took back the application in exchange for Azamat's application for relinquishment of parental rights. But he is still officially their father. The Sokoluk District Court dismissed the case because of the victim's counter-application and reconciliation of the parties. After being released, Azamat started a new wave of harassment and threats. He wrote daily threatening messages to Asel, changed phone numbers to relentlessly continue his pressure. He openly said in voice messages that if he caught Asel, he would kill her. He waited for her in the driveway. He waited for her at work. He followed her everywhere. For 3 months, Asel's relatives took turns living with her and her children, protecting her from Azamat's attacks. But this did not save the woman from the second violence. On January 31st, 2023, the woman went to the police again and reported that her ex-husband had again taken advantage of her by using force. A criminal case was also opened and the suspect was detained. After the investigation, the materials were sent to the court. The family was waiting for the decision and expected a real term of at least 5 years. On the day when the trial was to take place, the judge and 2 prosecutors invited Asel to a separate office. Azamat was there. In front of her eyes, they took off his handcuffs, informing him that they applied 3 years of probation instead of 5 years of imprisonment. In fact, he remained free. The court considered such a decision appropriate because Azamat has an elderly mother with a disability and 2 children from his marriage to the victim. Let me clarify that probation is a set of measures applied to convicted persons. The purpose of probation is to correct behavior and prevent the commission of new crimes. Asel was crying. She felt herself driven into the darkest corner from which there was no escape. Despair and fear once again confidently settled in the woman's life. But Asel did not wait for new attacks. She no longer believed anyone and did not listen to Azamat's relatives. Asel took down all the beatings. She hired a lawyer and filed an appeal with the Chue Regional Court. The lawyers provided the court with all the threats in the messages, all the voice messages, and this time, the case went to court. But a series of different events constantly postponed the hearing, bringing closer the worst day of Asel. First, the lawyer fell ill, and the trial was postponed for a month. The second and third hearings were also postponed for inexplicable reasons. At the 4th hearing, Asel begged not to postpone the hearing any longer because she was afraid not of beatings, but of death. Azamat continued to walk around freely and make attempts on Asel's life. On the eve of the meeting, he sent her a photo of a black backpack with a knife and a rope, with the caption, "I am ready to meet you," at the bottom. But due to Azamat's refusal of the state lawyer and the involvement of a private lawyer in the case was again postponed indefinitely. With such indifference of justice and law enforcement agencies, Asel simply had no chance to save herself. September 20th, 2023 began as usual. At 6:30 a.m., Asel woke up her children. They had breakfast together, and the caring mother accompanied her eldest son to school, wishing him a good day. Asel was about to leave the house too, so she didn't close the door, finishing getting ready. She brushed her hair as the front door suddenly opened. Azamat came in very quickly and very aggressively. The woman did not have time to react and close herself in the bathroom. He immediately hit her twice on the head, after which Asel fell into a stupor of incomprehension about what was happening. After the blows on her head, the pervert grabbed her by the throat and started strangling her. Asel lost consciousness. Nothing further. Asel lay unconscious. Sometimes she heard Azamat's voice, and it seemed to her that everything that was happening was a terrible dream. But the strong crying of her son brought her back to reality. Asel realized that she was awake. The boy covered himself with a blanket and crying repeated, "Daddy, don't do it." But his father ordered to keep silent. Otherwise, he would slaughter him too. Asel did not remember how from the bathroom, where she tried to hide, she found herself in the kitchen. He threw the unfortunate woman to the floor like an unnecessary thing, then picked her up again and continued to abuse her. In a moment, the pervert had lifted a seal up again and leaned her against the wall and was stabbing her face and neck with a clerical knife in cold blood. The next time Asel regained consciousness, she looked around and saw that everything was covered in blood, but she didn't realize what was happening. She had lost a lot of blood and her throat was dry. She kept asking for a drink. Her once beloved husband brought her a bucket of rags, and in it was water mixed with blood. The giver had gotten so into the taste of blood that he started picking out a knife. He went through all the kitchen knives and tried them on, choosing the one that would reach a seal's heart. But suddenly the door opened, and police officers entered the house. It turned out that a neighbor from downstairs heard the screams, and knowing about the difficult situation of Asel and her ex-husband, called the police, which saved her life by stopping the horrible torture. Azamat Estebesov resisted and attacked the officers with a knife. In such turmoil, no one realized what had happened. The whole apartment was drenched in blood. Azamat started cutting Asel in the bathroom, then dragged her to the kitchen through the hallway. He cut off his ex-wife's nose and ears and inflicted multiple wounds on her face and neck. He cut her throat, slashed her face, and beat her very badly. The district police officers arrived and called an ambulance. After assessing Asel's appearance, they began to look for the cut organs in a hurry, but they were nowhere to be found. Would you be surprised to know where they found the woman's ears and nose? In the monster's pocket. In pursuit of lost time, the police officers took Asel by their car to the 4th City Hospital in Bishkek. But there they did not provide her with first aid, explaining that according to her propiska, she did not belong to their hospital. Not only the doctors did not provide the victim with first aid, but they did not even stop the bleeding. Only in the 2nd hospital, she received first aid and stopped bleeding. She was then sent to the National Hospital, where she was operated on for 9 hours. 6 doctors worked meticulously to restore Asel's face. The found amputated organs were carefully delivered by the district police officers. The doctors meticulously collected everything, as the earlobes and nerve nodes were completely severed. Azamat did it with a special knife. It was very delicate work. The nose was also completely cut off. In the hospital, Asel did not regain consciousness for a long time. She miraculously survived. Psychologists warned that recovery would be long, and it would be very dangerous. The young, beautiful woman was disfigured. A criminal case under the article, causing grave harm to health of the Criminal Code of the Kyrgyz Republic, was initiated on the fact of the attack. The police detained the suspect in the commission of the crime. He was sent to a pre-trial detention center. On September 27, 2023, the sentence against Azamat Estebesov was changed to 8 years of imprisonment. By presidential decree, 9 judges were dismissed from their posts. Among them is the judge of Sokolok District Court of Choi Region Kielbek Toktomamatov, who released the man under probation supervision. The decree of the head of state says that Toktomamatov was dismissed in connection with the violation of the requirements of impeccable behavior of a judge. In addition to him, Sadir Japarov, by decree of November 1st, at the suggestion of the Council of Judges, prematurely terminated the powers of a number of judges who in one way or another violated the requirements of impeccability. 6 investigators were involved in further investigation of the incident. They brought up all the previous cases of Azamat Estebesov and studied them again. They took into account all the facts they found, and on them in the new indictment case, there were already 11 articles. At the end of December 2023, all investigative activities were completed, and on January 9, 2024, the first court hearings began. Azamat Estebesov did not admit guilt on any of the 11 episodes charged against him. He avoided answering the judge's questions in every possible way, and in some cases stated that he was possessed by a demon, so he could not speak. He behaved aggressively towards the witnesses, because of which the trial was postponed. On January 26, 2024, the final closed court session was held. Judge Taalaikul Tadirkulova taking into account all the details of such a complex case, sentenced Azamat Estebesov to 20 years of imprisonment without the right to apply probation. He must also pay 2 million sums to his ex-wife and a fine of 80,000 sums to the state. The judge decided to count 1 day spent in pre-trial detention center for 2. In spring, the defendant filed an appeal, but the sentence of 20 years imprisonment remained unchanged. Asel Nogoybayeva noted that she would go further and demand that the former spouse be sentenced to life imprisonment, and all those involved in encouraging his actions be publicly removed from office and punished. Let this be an example to everyone. I want no woman in Kyrgyzstan to endure the pain that I and my family are carrying. Thank you all who do not stand by, the victim concluded. Asel Nogoybayeva's family and activists asked that her ex-husband be given a life sentence. After all, despite the imprisonment, Azamat continued to text threats to Asel with a warning that he would still go out and find her. The case of Asel Nogoybayeva, about the powerlessness of a woman before the law of the country, and how a once loved and loving person turns into a cold-blooded monster in an instant, has finally come to its conclusion under the law. This case caused a wide public resonance throughout Kyrgyzstan. Asel's sister, Tatyana Yelkin, appealed to MPs to pass a law on domestic violence. She said that if the MPs do not pass a law on domestic violence, she will make them look at Asel's face without bandages and think what one wrong decision is worth. Asel's sister published a petition asking for a life sentence without parole for her sister's ex-husband. She recalled that her sister divorced her husband 5 years ago because of beatings and inadequate behavior of her spouse, but he did not leave her alone even after the divorce, stalking, beating, and abusing her. Azamat Estebesov is a dangerous person for society. People like him should not live free. They are obsessive and manic people. People like him should be behind bars. We ask for a life sentence for this monster. He has already killed a seal morally. He mutilated her face in front of her young son. People like him should be sentenced for life without the right to parole. She appeals in the petition. It doesn't matter what country it happened in. Family violence often takes monstrous forms. The topic of domestic violence should unite all women of the world. And we should not forget that religion is not an indicator that a person is adequate. Now Asel has a new life. Her new identity brings her great suffering. Despite the fact that Asel's wounds are gradually healing, full recovery of hearing and breathing functions will be long. In her interview, Asel told how she saw her face for the first time after the tragedy. There were no mirrors in my room, since I was not allowed to look at myself. It was a day off. My doctors were not there along with the doctor on duty, so I went to the first floor for dressing. I had my bandages removed, and there was a metal operating lamp. The doctor on duty had not put it away. I saw myself in the reflection. I'm afraid of myself. I can't look at myself in the mirror. I could already see my ears. From the shock, I lost consciousness. 2 weeks later, Asel saw her face completely. Her brother gave her a dressing at home. All the mirrors in the house were removed in advance, except for one mirror in the bathroom, because it could not be removed. When her brother left for 3 seconds, Asel quickly stood up and decided to look at herself. After seeing her reflection, she fainted. She had a very strong hysteria. Asel said that no one should ever see such ugliness. But the restoration of Asel's face is still ahead of her. Before the plastic surgery, she will have several operations to reconstruct her face, restore the frame of her ears and nose. These are surgeries that require long preparation, skin augmentation, and a long recovery period of at least a year. Also, Asel has lost her hearing by 20%, which will definitely be corrected as well. The difficulty is that these operations are not performed in Kyrgyzstan. Such complex operations are carried out in Turkey or in other countries, and this requires very large funds. Mikhail Surer, a plastic surgeon from Turkey, offered to perform the surgery free of charge, that is to cover all the costs. At first, Kyrgyz doctors told him that Asel had only the tip of her nose, but when Surer saw the woman's face without bandages, he was extremely shocked. It turned out that plastic surgery alone would not do the trick in this case. First, a whole series of operations to restore organs was needed. The surgery to restore the ears and nose of Asel Nogoybayeva, who was mutilated by her ex-husband, will cost at least $45,000. Asel's sister, Tatyana Yelkin, who who is actively engaged in disseminating information and raising funds for the operation, noted that all complex operations will be carried out in Turkey. Unfortunately, we have not raised even half of the needed $45,000. In addition, there are other expenses for accommodation, psychologist, rehabilitation, interpreter, medicines, and so on, Diana Yelkin said. I have more pictures of her without bandages. They are very scary. They are not for the faint of heart. I have been unable to come to my senses since yesterday, and I can't accept this face because there is nothing left of her ears and nose. Thank you to the doctors. They did everything they could. The main thing is that sepsis and gangrene did not go, said the sister of the victim. Diana Yelkin notes that if they cannot raise the necessary amount of money in the near future, she will publish her sister's face without bandages. Let the whole world see the true face of lawlessness, the true face of a victim of violence. Let every judge, policeman, deputy hang a picture of the mutilated Asil and look at her photo before making the necessary decisions, laws. If a year ago the judge had not given probation to this monster, all this would not have happened. The family and Asil were hoping for the law, for independent judges. Now we are making a challenge to everyone, a challenge to the judiciary of Kyrgyzstan. Diana regularly organized events to draw the attention of the Kyrgyz public to the problem of domestic violence against women. So far, fundraising has been held to help restore Asel Nogoybayeva's health. Asel's support, despite the terrible ordeal she endured, is an example of courage and determination in the fight against violence. Asel, who herself has yet to recover mentally and physically from 12 years of beatings, dreams of opening a foundation to help women who have also been abused like herself. After being abused, you can't stop helping others. To conclude the story, the real ugliness that no one should see is not Asil's face at all, but the essence of her ex-husband. Even with fatigue and pain in her eyes, one can see that Asil is a very feminine, gentle, and beautiful woman. It does not matter how her face looks now. She is a beautiful woman, because her soul and heart are beautiful. I would like to appeal to all women. Never tolerate and do not expect your chosen one to change, run away, and never come back. All nations have tyrants. A crime of honor committed by close relatives. A crime of honor is a severe criminal act, typically, but not necessarily, committed against a female family member as punishment for bringing disgrace and dishonor upon the family. The offenses punishable by death at the hands of relatives can vary across different countries and cultures, but often include marital infidelity and apostasy. Each year, according to official statistics, around 5,000 such crimes occur worldwide. However, various women's rights organizations claim this number is at least 4 times underreported. What is most alarming is that often the perpetrators face no punishment and their actions are deemed righteous. Police in countries where such crimes are prevalent simply turn a blind eye to these acts, and although it is claimed that in recent years the penalties for such actions have been intensified, there are no official data to substantiate this. Sami Shahid's case in 2016 shocked the world. She was forcibly married off to a cousin she openly despised and sent to her ancestral homeland. However, she soon broke off this imposed union to marry for love, against her relatives' wishes, and paid the ultimate price for it. Her story drew intense public scrutiny as she was a British citizen of Pakistani descent. Yet she met her tragic end in Pakistan, where the case was quickly suppressed, attempting to frame it as an unfortunate accident. The Shahid family story. Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid and Matiaz Shahid emigrated to the UK in the mid-1980s from a small Pakistani village named Pandori, located in the Jhelum district of Punjab province. They moved to a foreign land in search of a better life to escape the poverty they lived in back home. In November 1987, their eldest daughter, Sami, was born in the English city of Bradford, located in West Yorkshire, and a few years later, her younger sister Mida was born. The head of the family established his own business renting cars, which later focused on renting luxury vehicles, including high-end limousines. As his business prospered, he helped 2 of his brothers and their families also move from Pakistan and settle in the UK. The relatives also opened and successfully developed their businesses. One brother had his own seafood shop chain by the early 2000s, and the other opened a flower delivery and floristry company. Overall, the Shahid family was quite well known and successful in Bradford, being quite wealthy and influential. Sisters Sami and Mita were born and raised in the UK, but their family strictly adhered to the laws and traditions of their ancestral country, so the girls grew up under the influence of a mix of European and Pakistani cultures and customs. The liberal English views and manners starkly contrasted with the strict orders of their ancestors' country. For example, the girls were not allowed to drive a car, and all their contacts and movements were strictly monitored by their father. The elder daughter, Sami, was the apple of Chaudhry Muhammad's eye and was considered daddy's girl. He indulged her in every way, buying her expensive outfits and jewelry, and paid for her education at one of the most prestigious universities. She meticulously cared for her appearance, used cosmetics from well-known brands, visited beauty salons, and spent extravagant amounts of money there. Meanwhile, she worked part-time at a post office, essentially supported by her father who paid for all her whims and desires. Frequently, Sami, without her family knowing, would rent a car and drive herself. She loved driving, felt confident behind the wheel, and did not understand why Pakistani traditions forbade women from doing so. She was headstrong and freedom-loving, but she tried not to upset her parents, doing everything as they said. Shahid had many friends from school and university in England with whom she kept in touch. She was characterized as a bright, kind, and cheerful person. Forced marriage. Despite living a life filled with love and abundance and seemingly having everything she wanted, the woman was deprived of the opportunity to make any decisions independently. She constantly lived with an eye towards her parents' and elder family members' opinions, from whom she needed constant approval for her actions. More than anything, Sami feared upsetting her father, whom she adored. However, numerous prohibitions, fears, and strict orders meant she was never truly honest with her family. In 2012, her parents decided it was time for their eldest daughter to settle down, get married, start her own family, and have children. They insisted that she go to Pakistan and enter into a marriage in accordance with all the rules and cultural traditions. They chose her cousin, Chaudhry Muhammad Shakil, whom she barely knew, as her groom. It's worth noting that marriages between relatives and arranged marriages are quite common, although not a strict requirement in Sunni Islam, but the tradition is honored to this day. Sami knew that sooner or later her parents would choose a husband for her and present it as a fait accompli, leaving her with no choice in the matter. She was prepared for this, understanding the inevitability of such a marriage, but her father's choice was truly shocking to her. Shakil was openly distasteful to her, even causing her some repulsion. Additionally, he had recently been released from prison where he served time for ending someone's life over a land dispute. Since childhood, Sami occasionally interacted with Shakil as if he were a brother, but she could never imagine him as her spouse. Notably, her own parents were also cousins whose marriage was arranged by relatives, but they managed to genuinely fall in love and build a happy family. Her parents believed that their daughter would experience the same fate and that she and Chaudhry would eventually fall in love. Despite her aversion to the groom, Sami could not disobey her father and understood how important this was to her family. However, her mother and younger sister Mita later claimed that no one forced her into the marriage, and given her complex and headstrong character, it would have been impossible to do so physically or morally. She married voluntarily, without any coercion. In early February 2012, the decision about the upcoming wedding was finalized at a family council. The following couple of weeks, her parents and aunt and uncle, future in-laws, took the bride shopping, where she chose everything she liked, and they paid for expensive outfits, jewelry, accessories, cosmetics, and so on. Sami was denied nothing, but it all seemed as if she was being purchased. Likely that was indeed the case. The bride pretended to be caught up in the wedding preparations, but inwardly she felt like a hostage. She already understood that this marriage would not bring her happiness, but would be a real punishment. However, she could only discuss this with her friends, not her family. At home, she needed to appear happy, discuss the details of the upcoming celebration, and prepare for her departure to Pakistan. On February 20th, 2012, the young woman boarded a plane and, while in the cabin, sent a message to a close friend saying she was flying thousands of miles to make the biggest mistake of her life, but she had no choice. Later, she sent several more messages in which she confessed that the mere sight of the groom made her nauseous, and she could not stand to be near him. On February 27th, a lavish wedding was held for Sami and Chaudhry in Pandori, attended by about 1,000 people. The celebration lasted 4 days, and as a wedding gift, her parents presented the newlyweds with their own luxurious 2-story house, located next to their family home in the same province of Pandori. However, the young woman understood that this rich and beautiful house would become a real prison for her, where she would be forced to live with a man she did not love. Return to the United Kingdom. Family life, predictably, did not bring Sami happiness. She still detested her now lawful husband and realized she could neither love this man nor even grow accustomed to him. But 4 months later, in mid-June 2012, the young woman returned to her native Bradford to sort out some issues and help her husband with the immigration documents for obtaining British citizenship. She was supposed to apply for a spousal visa for Shakil, but she was in no hurry with this, enjoying the illusion of freedom and the opportunity to not see her unloved husband for some time. When Sami finally started processing the documents, she learned that their wedding ceremony, conducted according to all the canons of Sharia, was just a marriage contract between Muslims, but had no legal force in the United Kingdom. To recognize such a marriage, certain measures under European laws were necessary, namely conducting a civil ceremony and obtaining an official document, a marriage certificate. Friends of Sami noticed changes in her character and behavior after returning from Pakistan. The young woman appeared sad, her eyes seemed extinguished. She was no longer the joyful and sociable person she used to be, and she clearly harbored deep resentment towards her parents. Any conversations or mentions of her husband and family life provoked irritation and anger in her. The issue was that Shakil was very jealous and tormented his wife, even from another country. He constantly called her and could demand at any time that she video chat with him. This was how the man controlled where his wife was, what she was doing, and who was with her. Moreover, this was, in a way, a demonstration of the husband's superiority and his power over the woman. In early August of the same year, during a phone conversation with a close friend, Sami confessed that her nerves were giving out. She was completely drained and no longer wanted to live because she had lost any joy, hope for happiness, and a bright future. She said she detested Chaudhry with all her soul and never wanted to see him again. However, she could not say this to her relatives. They only went around telling everyone about the luxurious wedding they had arranged for their eldest daughter. The very man. In early September, without having resolved the issues with the spousal visa, Sami was forced to return to Pakistan to her unloved husband. She regularly wrote to friends about how miserable she was, how much she hated her marriage, and how she felt trapped with no way out. This continued for several months, but then she began to complain less frequently, and her mood changed. During her next visit to the United Kingdom, it became clear what had caused this change. It turned out that she had met a young man online, Syed Mukhtar Kazim, who, like her, was a British citizen of Pakistani origin. He was born and raised in London but had been working and living in the United Arab Emirates for the last few years. The pair started corresponding and quickly developed romantic feelings. They secretly arranged a meeting, and in October 2013, they saw each other in person for the first time. Sami immediately realized that Syed was the man of her dreams, with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. He was kind, caring, attentive, and courted her beautifully. They had a lot in common, but they both understood how dangerous and risky their relationship was. Nevertheless, life only seemed meaningful to the young people when they were together. She openly told her beloved about the situation she was in and said she was ready to end her marriage to start anew with Syed. However, she could not get a divorce through a British court because, according to local law, she was not married at all. Divorce and new marriage. In the spring of 2014, Shahid decided to speak with Shakil and asked him for a divorce, but he rudely refused, stating that she would belong to him until the end of her days. Then, during another visit to the United Kingdom to her parents, she secretly contacted a local Islamic Sharia council, reporting that she had been forced into marriage, which was a valid basis for annulling the marriage. She also converted from Sunni to the Shiite branch of Islam, which her new lover belonged to. The cleric contacted the woman's husband to hear his side regarding their marriage, but he again rudely refused to discuss his personal life, stating that he would not give permission for a divorce. After that, the Islamic Sharia Council of the United Kingdom dissolved the marriage, recognizing that Shahid had been coerced into it by family pressure. Sami's family members had no idea that she had divorced her husband in absentia and was preparing to remarry, now to the man she loved. In September 2014, the young woman secretly married her new chosen one. This time, the union had legal force, and the spouses received a certificate of registration of their relationship, confirming its legality. The same cleric who had granted permission to dissolve the bride's previous marriage conducted the Nikah religious ceremony. Only a few close friends of the newlyweds, who were present at their wedding, knew about this event. The couple was truly happy. Sami confessed to her friends that she felt like a princess in a fairy tale and couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. However, this joyous and happy event was the beginning of a real nightmare: family dispute and escape from the country. When Shakil demanded that his wife return to Pakistan, she responded that she no longer belonged to him and presented a certificate of her new marriage. This infuriated the man, who immediately called his father-in-law to inform him of the situation, sparking a severe scandal. The family attempted to coerce her to return to her husband with threats, but she refused, which soon led to severe consequences. A few weeks later, Sami was brutally assaulted on the street while shopping with her sister. Notably, her sister was unharmed, but Sami nearly had her legs broken with metal bars. The police took her statement but failed to find the men responsible for the assault, and the case was quickly dismissed. At this time, Syed had to fly to Dubai for work, leaving his wife in the United Kingdom awaiting a visa to follow him. The wait became a real torment for her, filled with endless threats, disputes with relatives, and fear for her life. Moreover, her parents tried to prove that their daughter's divorce from Shakil was invalid, and even caused a scene with the cleric who had married the lovers. Sami's mother was furious, insulting her daughter and saying that she had disgraced their family and would suffer terrible retribution. In the spring of 2015, Sami finally received her visa and was able to fly to her husband in Dubai. It felt more like an escape, as the young woman feared her family would do everything possible to keep her and forcibly return her to Pakistan. For several months, she kept her passport with friends who also bought her a plane ticket and accompanied her to the airport, a new life. The following year was the happiest in Sami's life. She enjoyed her freedom and the ability to make her own decisions, living with the man she loved, who adored her and was ready to carry her on his hands. Additionally, she could drive a car, something her parents and former husband would never have allowed her to do. In photos posted on social media, Sami was radiantly happy. She blossomed, looked more beautiful, and it was clear she had achieved what she had always dreamed of. Shahid wanted to become a mother as soon as possible, but sadly, this happiness was not meant to be for her. Nonetheless, she and her husband confidently looked to the future, making plans for their lives, unaware that her closest relatives had already condemned her. Immediately after their daughter's departure, her parents filed a missing persons report with the police, which they later wanted to reclassify as an abduction, accusing Kazim of the crime. The Shahid family members started devising a plan to force the young woman to return by any means necessary, considering various options. Threats no longer worked on her, but they could play on her sympathy. A sinister trap. In June 2016, Sami's parents conveyed tragic news. Her aunt, Shakil's mother, had passed away. Sami was devastated and even considered flying to Pakistan for the funeral, but she was aware of the risks involved. Many family members still hadn't accepted that she had left her unloved husband and remarried. Her actions were viewed as betrayal and disgrace. A week after the aunt's funeral, her mother called again, reporting that her father's health had severely deteriorated. He had diabetes, and his condition had recently become unstable. If he passed away, Sami knew she would never forgive herself if she didn't visit him. Despite her concerns and her husband's attempts to dissuade her, she decided to travel to Pandori. Fearing for her life and safety, she promised her husband to keep in constant contact with him. On July 14, 2016, Shahid arrived in Pakistan and first went to a close friend's house. She left her passport and return ticket to Dubai with her friend, shared her fears, noted her bad premonition, and asked her friend to pray for her safe return to Syed. The following few days passed relatively peacefully. She stayed in touch with her husband and friend, updating them on her movements. She visited her aunt's grave with her family and met with many relatives. She was scheduled to fly back to Dubai on July 21st. However, on July 20th, Sami suddenly stopped making contact. Tragic news. On July 20th, 2016, Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid called the police station to report the tragic death of his daughter. When law enforcement arrived at the house where Sami had lived with her first husband, they found her lifeless body at the bottom of the stairs. Unfortunately, it was too late to help her. There were several visible bruises on her body, which, according to her parents, she sustained from falling down the stairs, and a small amount of pinkish foam was found coming out of her mouth. According to her father, Sami likely had a heart problem, fell, and rolled down the stairs. Since no one was home at the time, she was not assisted promptly and she passed away. When asked about the whereabouts of the deceased's husband, Chaudhry stated that he had gone out on business. The police found no signs of foul play at the scene and did not open a criminal case, leaving the final determination to the forensic experts. An autopsy was conducted on the same day, yet the pathologist found no signs of violence, and the conclusion was that her death was due to natural causes. She was buried within a few hours of her death. Sami's sudden demise was not considered suspicious and raised no questions, except from her grieving husband. When Kazim was informed of his wife's sudden death from a heart attack, he couldn't believe it. Moreover, the press called the young woman's death a voluntary departure from life due to depression over her inability to have children. However, this version was contested by Shahid's relatives, who claimed she lost consciousness on the stairs and broke her neck while falling. Investigation and the grim truth. Syed Muhtar flew to Pandori on the first available flight and went straight to the police station to report that his wife was deprived of her life by her relatives and former husband. He described the forced marriage and her escape, as well as threats from her family. This information fundamentally changed the case. The authorities recognized it as an honor crime, but the body had already been buried, and the official report stated that Shahid died of natural causes. However, as the deceased was a British citizen, Kazim sought to involve European law enforcement and the media in the investigation. Initially, Sami's father agreed to an interview and tried to portray Syed Muhtar as an imposter and extortionist. However, after the young man produced their marriage certificate, as well as a hard-won copy of the medical report and post-mortem photos of the deceased, an investigation was initiated. The report noted bruises on the deceased's neck and legs and traces of male seminal fluid on her body, indicating that she had intimate relations shortly before her demise. But with whom, if Shakil was supposedly not at home that day? Kazim held a press conference, presenting all the evidence he had, including text, voice, and video messages from Sami, in which she repeatedly expressed fear for her life. Suspicions arose that the police had been bribed, and the deceased's father and former husband were immediately detained. It turned out they had no intention of letting the young woman return to Dubai. They forcibly brought her to the house given as a wedding gift, where they searched all her belongings for the passport and ticket, which, as mentioned, she had left with a friend. A furious Shakil, with his father-in-law's tacit approval, physically subdued the young woman, and after she tried to escape, the men caught up with her on the stairs. While the former husband strangled Sami with her scarf, the father held her legs, leaving her no chance of survival. This account was confessed at the station by the perpetrator himself, although Chaudhry Muhammad denied any involvement in the act against his own daughter. Legal proceedings and the fate of the participants. Besides the father and former husband, the deceased's uncle, who had acquired a forged report before the autopsy, and the commissioner who conducted the initial investigation, were also detained. In court, Shakil recanted his confession, claiming it was made under duress. He spent just over 2 years behind bars but was released on bail in September 2018. In 2019, the man remarried and again attempted to relocate to the United Kingdom, which was unsuccessful. The father of the deceased was in prison from July to December 2016 and was also released on bail. He passed away in January 2018 at the age of 52 due to exacerbated health problems, never admitting guilt or involvement in his daughter's demise. The deceased's uncle and the commissioner were also released in the fall of 2016 without facing any consequences. Soon after, arrest warrants were issued in Pakistan for Mita and Matiyaz Shahid, but the mother and sister of the deceased promptly returned to Bradford. Mita later gave a substantial interview in which she attempted to discredit Sami and her second husband, blaming them for the downfall of the once happy Shahid family. Parents can be very intrusive, arrogant, and demanding in their demands. Sometimes it brings some benefit, and sometimes it does not. There are times when this demanding is even dangerous. Brett Ryan was in just such a situation. He grew up in a prosperous and large Canadian family where his parents, Bill and Susan, had 4 sons. It might seem that having so many children, and especially boys, is hard and exhausting parenting labor. But it wasn't for everyone. Their parents tried to teach the younger Ryans by example. Their father, in addition to his prestigious job at the Toronto Star daily newspaper, had many hobbies, such as sports, yoga, and psychology. And as for Susan, she was very hardworking, and the whole family home rested on her shoulders. She not only gave her time to her husband and children, but also kept a huge house in a prestigious area of Toronto in perfect condition, and all this without the help of gardeners and craftsmen. Neighbors passing by the family home for a while lingered to admire the huge and blooming garden through the fence. It could not be said that Brett was the family favorite. No, Suzanne loved everyone equally, but from the outside it might have seemed that it was Brett who was scolded least of all for obedience. The thing was, he could always get out of any situation. Even when all the evidence pointed to his involvement, he found a way to prove that he was only partially involved. And amazingly, that ability helped him have a lot of friends. Yeah, Brett was pretty damn popular at school. Everyone wanted to be friends with him, or at least be able to say hello by the hand. Just like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. Brett always wanted to be better than his brothers, so he took out an ad in the local newspaper offering Toronto residents a service to paint houses and fences. At first things were going really well. The young man had his first money. Susan was even proud of her son and always held him up as an example to others. But it's one thing when this money is a part-time job, and quite another when you drop out of university to spend all your free time breathing in the smell of paint and not having any education. Yes, after a while, Brett dropped out of university. While for the first couple of years Brett felt confident in front of his older brothers, after a while, when Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their specialties, Brett's authority began to fade. Christopher worked for the City of Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland became the family artist and designer. After their studies, they moved out of their parents' home, and Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett became more and more desperate. Because of his debts and inability to pay them off, he developed depression. By 2007, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had passed $60,000. Brett was considered a pretty smart guy, but he didn't know how to use his mind. At the same time, he did not show how bad he was. He always smiled, helped everyone, was a participant of volunteer movements. No one could believe how big the black hole in his soul was. Finally came that fateful moment when nothing could be done, at least not legally. On October 28, 2007, Brett had no orders for house painting or any other work around the house. Orders are always extremely scarce in the fall. Everyone who wanted to had already painted their houses in the spring or summer. Winter was approaching, from which you should not expect any big earnings. There was no time to wait for anything. Brett put on all the old clothes he had in his closet, a hat, a long sweater he'd gotten from his older brother, a scarf his mother had knitted. The scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't even worn it before, but finally the scarf came in handy. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank that was on the outskirts of his neighborhood. He was clutching some thick folder and limped playfully on his right foot. Brett waited his turn at the bank, and when he was finally summoned by an employee, he went up to her and told her in a quiet voice that he had a gun with him. He also told her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him. Otherwise, he would shoot here, and the first person he would kill would be her. The girl with trembling hands handed him all the cash she had in the cash register, and Brett quietly walked out of the building so as not to attract the attention of the guards, and when he was on the street, he ran away. He counted the money he had stolen. It wasn't very much, a little over $1,000. To pay off his debts, he would have to rob about 60 banks. Sounds fantastic, but there was no other way out. For the first few days, the novice robber feared that the police would somehow still be able to get to him, so he did not appear at home. He told his mother that he had an order in the neighboring town, and he himself spent the night in the car. Periodically, Brett crept up to his house to see if there was a police car in the bushes. No, it was quiet. No one was looking for him. That's good. So he's headed in the right direction. The first robbery was followed by a second, third, fourth. Brett changed clothes each time. He didn't wear his old clothes anymore. He bought them secondhand, or even found them in the trash. After the crime, he burned the used clothes. Brett also purchased a beard from a store that sold outfits for costume parties. The bank employees he threatened always noticed his beard and later testified that the attacker was a bearded man. Toronto newspapers began publishing a number of articles about the bearded robber. But the bearded robber never made a fortune in robberies. The maximum amount that could be stolen did not exceed $3,000. Finally, Brett had a misfire. The police spotted his car on the surveillance cameras and followed him all the way home. By that time, they still had no direct evidence of his guilt. It was decided to just follow the suspect. It was as if Brett sensed the outside surveillance and did not go on a robbery spree for the next 15 days, although before that, the intervals between crimes were 3 or 4 days. The cops thought they were on the wrong trail and wasting their time suspecting an innocent guy, but finally, luck smiled on them. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later got out of the car not far from the bank, wearing a different, strange outfit. He went into the branch, stayed there for a while, but at the exit, he was met by the police to finally handcuff him and announce that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett was under investigation for 7 months. He was charged with robbery with a firearm. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always came to the bank empty-handed. He didn't even have a kitchen knife with him. In total, he was charged with 19 counts and was sent to prison. From there, Brett, just like his family, filed multiple appeals. This yielded results. Only 8 of the 19 counts were upheld. But Brett didn't stop there. As soon as he had the opportunity to apply for parole, he took it. In his petition, Brett asked to take into account the fact that he went to these crimes being in a severe depression, caused by 2 failed relationships, as well as a large amount of debt. At the same time, he once again noted that he went to the crimes without weapons, absolutely not planning to harm anyone. His remarks were accepted, but in order to get out of prison early, he had to undergo a session with a psychologist. The sessions had a positive effect on Brett. All the time he was behind bars, he did not communicate with his family, and now he himself has made a step towards getting closer and restoring relations with his family. The positive changes were noticed by the commissioners, so on November 24, 2010, Brett was released. This freedom, for which the young man fought so zealously, turned out to be very bitter and even harder than it was before. Who was Brett before? A painter with a heavy burden on his soul. What was he now? Brett the bank robber, Brett the ex-con. With such a tainted background, he was never hired by any company, and those who hired him for house painting services, as soon as they recognized him as the bearded robber, refused his services. Also the neighbors, yes, the same ones who used to praise Susan's garden and visit, now began to spread various unpleasant rumors. The whole Ryan family hastily sold the house and moved to Scarborough. Susan started growing her new garden again, and Brett did get a job with a trading company, but his pay was not high. His parents were also helping him with money to rebuild his university education. Brett still visited a psychologist, and each time the specialist advised him the same thing: don't break the connection with your family. The psychologist's advice really worked. Despite this, Brett's financial well-being left much to be desired. In September 2011, the first happy accident in his life happened. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was just a fantastic girl. She had her own apartment, the windows of which overlooked the sea, thanks to which the young couple opened a beautiful landscape. She was engaged in sports, which allowed her to keep her body in shape. And most importantly, she did not care about Brett's past. They also traveled periodically as a couple, and had even been to Australia. Brett's father and mother, watching his relationship with the girl develop, were very happy. In addition, they were sure that their son will finally take his head, and Kristen will push him in every possible way to develop and finally take his place in society. Brett felt that life was starting to get better, but there was an unfortunate event that was out of his control, and that disrupted the building of a new phase. Brett's father died. For him, it was a real shock. His depressive state began to return, because of which Brett began to visit a psychologist more often. He also had to spend a lot of time with his mother and help her with money, which he already had a little. A long relationship with Kristen had to be developed. Young people were not teenagers, which is enough just to meet and spend free time together. Being madly in love with this enchanting blonde, Brett decided to take a serious step. He had some savings, plus he talked to his mother and said that he wanted to build a family with Kristen. And to do this, he needed to make her an offer that Kristen could not refuse him and remember this day for the rest of her life. Susan realized what her son was getting at and gave him money to buy a ring. It should be noted that the couple had discussed their future before that. And no, Kristen didn't need some expensive gift or something like that. It was enough for her to get a proposal from Brett as a confirmation of his serious intentions. But he still decided to splurge and bought a gold ring with a huge diamond for his beloved. Kristen, of course, told him yes. Then, as is usually the case, the young people began planning their wedding. Brett agreed with all of Kristen's decisions and nodded approvingly, but he was horrified at how expensive it was and how much he needed to think about his job. He found an engineering job opening for a large technology company on the internet, put together a resume, and responded to it. He even had a successful interview and was accepted. Brett was happy at the time. He immediately excited his fiancée and his mother with this news, from whom he again asked for money to buy himself an expensive suit to wear to work. Once again, his mother did not refuse her son. When the suit was already bought, Brett received a call from the company saying that they had to refuse him because the security service had found out about his criminal past. For Brett, it was like thunder that broke over him. His mood began to plummet immediately, and he finally gave up. Why waste time on this endless series of interviews, waiting for answers, if in the end, no one wants to hire a criminal, even if corrected? And most importantly, why waste time studying? Brett decided that it would be better to spend the money his mother and older brothers gave him for his university studies on his wedding to Kristen, and so he did. Brett was back in the situation he had recently gotten out of. He didn't tell his family that he had dropped out of university, and most importantly, he didn't tell his counselor. He also didn't tell anyone that he had been turned down for an engineering job. He put on a shirt, tie, suit, and went to paint houses, changing into a change of clothes right on the way, and told his relatives that he was working in an office. In addition, in his social networks, Brett constantly posted various photos from the office, or from some business event, of course, previously downloaded from the internet. And also being near his loved ones, he often pretended as if his phone was ringing and he urgently needed to solve some work issues. He was very skillful at making dust in his eyes, and no one would have thought that Brett was actually a common painter. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett planned to have a wedding. He even agreed to rent an expensive restaurant where it was necessary to pay $100 for each guest. The whole Ryan family was very happy because Brett finally took himself in hand, has a prestigious job, lives in a fancy apartment, and he has a stunning bride. But they had no idea that Brett's lies had gone too far and there was no way to get out of it unscathed. By then, the wedding was only a month away and the event required an investment. Our hero again and again borrowed money from his mother, and when he realized that she was no longer able to help him, he literally demanded that she change her job to a better-paying one. Also, he planned a bachelor party in August, to which he invited all his friends and brothers. As the fuse of this bombshell began to burn out, Brett still decided to tell his counselor about everything. Brett had been lying to his family for a year about working for a technology company as an engineer. The psychologist was saddened that the guy he'd been leading for so long had gotten off the right track again, and said that Brett just needed to come clean to his mother. Brett thought about it for a long time, procrastinated, but eventually did so. His mother was insanely upset because she had spent so long telling everyone what a wonderful son she had. She also demanded that Brett tell Kristen everything because if he kept quiet, she would. She also warned her son that his brothers were already aware of the situation and they were on her side. Brett couldn't do that. After all, he'd had such a hard time telling his mother the truth, and he couldn't tell Kristen about his lies. Yes, he knew that there was less than a month until the wedding, which wouldn't happen because of his lying, and indeed, it would have been better for Kristen to know everything in advance, but he still kept quiet. It wasn't clear what Brett was counting on, and he also couldn't help thinking that his mother would really tell his fiancée everything, and then the scandal would be unavoidable. Brett flinched every time Kristen's phone rang, and even stopped breathing until he realized that it wasn't his mother calling, but another friend of his future wife, asking her about her wedding plans and giving her advice. Finally, he figured out how to silence his mother permanently. When Brett was convicted of robbery, he was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow. And besides, it's a pretty silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was crossbow shooting in the garden at targets. He taught Brett how to shoot too. Yes, he was good at target shooting, except that it was unlikely his late father thought his son would use that skill in such a way. Brett bought the crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store and hid it behind the construction debris that lay in Susan's garage. At home, he arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan itself on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on, and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From the outside, it must have looked like Brett had spent all day at home, watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, Brett dressed up in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid the security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house to get rid of anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day, but Brett, despite his mother's condition, once again began to persuade her and even demand not to tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then he began to get angry, and Susan, sensing something wrong, seeing her son's mad eyes, warned him that she had already called Christopher and he was on his way to them. Brett was going crazy. He ran to the garage, got a crossbow, but his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. He just bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun, and finally, to be sure that she was finally dead, he tightened the rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived, started calling for his mother or his brother, but in response was shot in the neck from behind, which caused him to die within a few minutes. The next victim was the youngest brother, Alexander. As it turns out, Susan managed to call him too. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not go deep or did not hit vital arteries, so Alexander did not die immediately, but began to scream and call for help. All this time, Leland was in the house, sleeping in his room on the second floor, and had no idea of the carnage that was going on in the garage and in the garden, and most importantly that it was his own brother who was committing the crime. His sleep was disturbed by a scream, and coming downstairs, Leland saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett, and as soon as Leland got the upper hand and managed to push his brother aside, he immediately ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized that this was the moment he had completely screwed up his life. There was nothing to do. He took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. The police arrived at the crime scene and saw a bloody Brett, who was sitting next to his equally bloody but still alive brother Alexander, who would die later in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station, where he would confess to everything. He also said that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At the police station and later at the trial, Brett admitted that he did not want to kill Susan. His plan was only to scare her. Christopher and Alexander, on the other hand, he did plan to kill that day, but as witnesses, and if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Just like almost 10 years ago, he tried to justify everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. And despite the fact that the judge took into account the fact that Brett confessed to everything himself and did not cause the investigation any trouble, the young man received 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder, with the right to get parole in 2041. As for Leland, he's not speaking to reporters, but he's known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that carnage. Today, we're going to visit Indianapolis. It is a blend of modernity and original origins, ancient traditions, and advanced technology. Indianapolis boasts art museums that showcase examples of cultural achievements from past centuries and modern times. Indianapolis hosts many festivals and events each year, with the Indy 500 automobile race being the most popular. But in our story, the tranquil Indianapolis that was to become for the Blackburn family a center of peace and God's home on earth became the site of a violent tragedy. On the morning of November 10, 2015, a car parked outside a home on Sunnyfield Court. Davy Blackburn had returned from his daily workout at the gym. He was about to get out of the car, but a phone call kept him in the vehicle for a few minutes. After finishing the call, he leisurely got out of the car and went into the house. When he opened the door, he froze, and the gym bag fell out of his hands. His wife was lying on the living room floor in a pool of blood. Davy was confused and badly shocked. He rushed to his beloved, gave her a cursory examination, felt for a pulse, and urgently dialed the emergency phone number. The young woman was alive. In the living room where the tragedy occurred was a complete mess. Things were scattered. The purse of the unfortunate was emptied. On the second floor of the house, a small child was crying. Emergency services arrived at the house after 8 minutes. The area was cordoned off. The house was filled with police officers and investigators. The victim was rushed to the hospital. She turned out to be 28-year-old Amanda Blackburn. But let's start in order not to miss any important details of this tragic story. Amanda Grace Byers was born on July 31st, 1987 in Muskegon, Michigan. She attended school in Indianapolis, Indiana, but the family moved to Elkhart in 1995. There, Amanda graduated from Elkhart Christian Academy in 2006, and as early as 2008, she graduated from Pensacola Christian College in Pensacola, Florida with an associate's degree. Amanda grew up in a deeply religious family where Christianity and the power of God's Word were paramount. Amanda's father was the lead pastor of First Baptist Church in Elkhart, Indiana. The religious traditions of the church, sermons, and psalter the girl knew from childhood by heart and honored them unconditionally. When other children were in a hurry to grow up to know the taste of adult life, to go to parties and fall in love, Amanda loved Jesus and dreamed of serving him. But God already loved his Amanda. After all, he had created her in the likeness of an angel, a blonde-haired, slender girl with an open, kind smile and sincere intentions. But not only the girl's appearance was perfect, her thoughts and heart were also virgin. In every act of Amanda was love for her neighbor. As a teenager, Amanda took a vow of chastity and agreed not to even kiss a man until she was married, and she was always true to her word. But the girl's heart beat harder when she met her true and only love. It turned out to be Davy Blackburn. He was a native of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The guy studied religion at Southern Wesleyan University and was also from a Christian and believing family. Davy and Amanda met on a blind date at a Hawk Nelson Christian band concert organized by her sister and Davy's best friend. At that time, they were studying in different colleges, but every vacation the lovers spent together. It was pure platonic love, devoid of earthly lusts. They took walks together, shared their innermost thoughts and favorite excerpts from church books. They were never bored, for they knew how to rejoice in small things, and sincerely joked with each other. Once, before returning to school, Davy and Amanda had a mock milkshake drinking contest, which Amanda lost. Davy then jokingly called Amanda a milk girl. Looking at her, he realized he had met the girl he wanted to marry. The couple dated long distance for a long time. They were constantly messaging each other on messengers, called each other and chatted for hours, every vacation they spent together. They were so reverent and tender about a serious relationship between a man and a woman that they visited a psychologist for a long time to learn how to communicate properly. On August 1st, 2008, the marriage ceremony of Amanda and Davy Blackburn took place. After the wedding, Davy told friends that from the moment he kissed Amanda, he knew that because of God's plan, there would be a special bond between them. For the first 4 years after the wedding, the Blackburns lived in South Carolina. Davy was an associate pastor at New Spring Church under Pastor Perry Noble, but the young man wanted more, and he suggested to Amanda that she move to Indianapolis to organize a new church for youth. Davy worked as a youth pastor, production director, and assistant campus pastor. Amanda was reluctant to leave her family and part with her loved ones, and for a while struggled with the need to leave South Carolina. But she finally relented after her husband told her that God must have big things in store for them. In 2012, the Blackburns moved from South Carolina to Indianapolis to plant an independent, high-profile church in the North Side. The religious organization started by the young family was geared toward young people, as is made clear in the weekly videos the couple posted on their website about relationship advice, conflict resolution, and what the Bible says about intimate relationships. In 2014, the family had their firstborn child, Weston Blackburn. The family was perfectly happy. They had a comfortable home on a quiet street, a favorite job in the church, which was regularly attended by a large number of young people. Their sermons were listened to and believed in. They lived in perfect harmony and understanding. But the day of November 10th, 2015, changed the family's life once and for all. Ambulance crews arrived at the Blackburn residence in the 2800 block of Sunnyfield Court around 8:30 a.m. The ambulance crews arrived at the Blackburn residence. The pregnant young woman was rushed to the hospital where she was hooked up to a ventilator and underwent a series of resuscitative measures. But sadly, Amanda died the next day, along with her unborn baby. As it turned out, the family was expecting a baby girl who was named Evie Grace at her burial. Her death sparked a lot of sympathy and prayers on social media for an extended period of time as friends, family members, and strangers mourned Amanda with public posts. On November 11th, the day Amanda was officially declared dead, Davy released an official statement saying that Amanda made it her life's calling to love and serve everyone she knew. She made it her life's mission to know Jesus as her personal savior to multitudes. Through her death and legacy, more people will come to a saving faith in Christ. I know without a shadow of a doubt that she wants me to continue what we started here in Indy. I firmly believe that God is still good, that He is taking our tragedy and turning it into triumph, and that the best is indeed yet to come. Dave wrote, "The murder of the pregnant woman was a blow not only to the entire Orthodox family, but also a shock to the entire state. People demanded that the perpetrator of Amanda and her unborn child be found and punished." In his first interview under oath, Davy Blackburn said he found his wife Amanda injured and unconscious on the living room floor. She was partially naked, with her underwear lying nearby, herself lying on the floor in a pool of blood face down. The pastor told investigators that he left the house around 6 a.m. to go to the fitness center to work out. When he left the door unlocked. "You always do that too, don't you? You leave and don't lock the door?" he told investigators. It's hard to say whether the criminals would have stopped if Davy had still used the key, but it's pretty obvious that they wouldn't have entered the house so easily, and Amanda had precious time to contact emergency services. But that didn't happen, and the attack left Amanda with 3 gunshot wounds, one of which was to the head. No arrests were made in the case. Just days after the crime, police quickly determined that her husband, Davy Blackburn, was not involved in the horrific incident. However, in the trial transcripts, Davy Blackburn's testimony is supplemented by the testimony of the first emergency medical paramedic from the Indianapolis Fire Department, Scott Floyd, who arrived at the home after Davy's 911 call. He said Davy Blackburn was outside at the end of the driveway with bloody hands when they arrived at the house. Scott stated that Davy was very calm at the time. According to Scott, Davy did not understand what had happened to his wife, Amanda. He maintained that she was lying on the floor and he could not wake her up. Davy claimed that he came home from the gym at about 7:30 a.m. and continued his phone call with his friend Kenneth Wagner in the driveway, occasionally getting out, strolling down the driveway and peeking through the front door window to see if baby Weston was awake. He said he finished his call, entered his home at 8:10 a.m. and found Amanda lying face down on the floor. He thought she was sick or unconscious. He called emergency services at 8:22 a.m. It took him 12 minutes to make the call. In an emergency situation, 12 minutes is a long time. He repeatedly said he just thought something had gone wrong with the pregnancy, that maybe his wife had gotten dizzy and fell. Did he not notice after 12 minutes that there was brain matter about 5 feet away from her body? Emergency room Dr. Scott Floyd testified that the blood on her head was coagulated, leaving him to believe that the gunshot to her head had occurred about a couple hours earlier, but those transcripts were not made public. Davy was asked if he had called anyone else. He said that after he called 911, he called his father. Defense attorneys did not cross-examine Davy Blackburn. Authorities corroborated his story with surveillance footage from the gym, and he was not among the suspects. An autopsy conducted November 12th showed the woman suffered a gunshot wound to the back of her head. She also had a gunshot wound to the lower left arm that went to her biceps, and a through and through gunshot wound that went in and out of her upper back. There were also multiple scratches on the left cheek, a split lip, and a knocked-out lower tooth. The above injuries indicated a possible struggle between Amanda and her attacker. A thorough investigation was launched. CCTV footage from nearby streets was examined, and neighbors and family acquaintances were interviewed. For example, a neighbor reported hearing gunshots about 35 minutes after Davy left the house. Another neighbor, Reginald Townsell, said their street was not the type of neighborhood where a shooting could occur, and that the Blackburns didn't deserve this. The neighbors were shocked, as everyone thought the Blackburn family were wonderful and truly loving people. Based on Amanda's injuries and the missing bank cards and MacBook bag, the initial theory was robbery. During the investigation, police determined that on the morning of November 10, 2015, several emergency calls were made reporting a home invasion at separate homes near Blackburn's home. Around 5:20 a.m., One woman reported waking up to find her cell phone, laptop, purse, and keys missing from her apartment. Her car was also gone from the parking lot. The sliding glass door to her apartment was open, she said. 3 hours later, another woman reported a burglary at a home on Sunnyfield Court. Someone broke through the patio screen and got inside. According to police, 4 televisions, a MacBook Pro, a Tiffany pearl necklace, a pink women's sweater, a remote control, a bag of oranges and bedding were missing from the home. 5 minutes after that, someone else from Sunnyfield Court called the emergency services. It was Davy Blackburn. Lieutenant Richard Riedel of the Indianapolis Police Department said police are looking for a connection between the homicide and other burglaries that occurred in the same neighborhood in the morning. Police have not released details about the investigation, honoring the secrecy of the investigation, but after getting hold of images of possible suspects from one of the burglarized homes, they released them asking the public to identify and help the investigation. Davy Blackburn was confident that the police department was doing everything they could to catch his wife's perpetrator. Investigators assured that they had never seen such part of Blanche given to them to continue the investigation, so they were confident that very soon some of these promising leads would help find the person or persons responsible. The key clues used to track down the 3 suspects were a stolen pink sweater, cell phone records, and an ATM receipt. The receipt and sweater were found in the stolen Chrysler Sebring, which was used during the robberies. Authorities recovered the vehicle November 11th near the Blackburns' home. The debit card listed on the receipt matched the stolen card of Amanda Blackburn. Investigators obtained a warrant to examine the ATM camera and found video showing the driver covering his face with the stolen pink sweater. Police relied on DNA testing, surveillance footage, and witnesses to identify the suspects. DNA testing from the sweater confirmed that Jalen Watson was one of the suspects. Watson's identification was the first major breakthrough in the case. The affidavit said cell phone records were obtained because Watson's number was in the database because of his parole for another burglary. Diana Gordon's cell phone records were also obtained. These records showed that Watson's and Gordon's cell phones were in the area when the crime was committed. The phone records also indicated that Gordon and Watson were near the Chase Bank where Amanda's debit card was used on the day of the murder. Larry Taylor was the final piece of the puzzle. By examining surveillance footage in the area, police were able to identify Taylor's phone number and trace his address. In the days that followed, reports also surfaced that a gun had been found near the Blackburn home. Police said a man delivered the gun to the Broad Ripple Fire Department, claiming to have found it outside the couple's home. The gun was analyzed by crime lab technicians. After 2 weeks of investigation and detective work, police charged 18-year-old Larry Taylor and 21-year-old Jalen Watson with the murder of Amanda Blackburn. A third burglary suspect, 24-year-old Diana Gordon, was arrested for a parole violation, but was not charged with a felony because he did not enter the Blackburn home. After receiving crime lab results, a gun found near the victim's home was proven to be the weapon of the crime. All 3 assailants were apprehended. When questioned, Larry Taylor said that he shot the woman twice somewhere because she jumped on him and he didn't want her to scratch him. Then, when she fell, he leaned over her body and shot her in the back of the head and bent over her watching her bleed to death. A criminal trio came to rob the Blackburn house. They just wanted some money. So they headed to the Blackburn home, where the husband had left the front door unlocked when he left for the gym. Inside, they confronted Amanda to keep her out of the way. Taylor hit her with a gun. Watson and Gordon saw the woman and wanted to leave. They already had the bank cards they had stolen earlier, so they went looking for an ATM. They tried unsuccessfully to get $500 from one ATM, but got $400 from another. This is where they got caught on CCTV. They then drove back to the Blackburn house to pick up Taylor. In their absence, a struggle ensued in the house. Amanda came to her senses after being hit and lunged at the perpetrator, at which point he tackled the woman. Afterward, Taylor put the stolen debit cards in the car of accomplices, who had gone to an ATM at the time of the crime, and when they returned, he admitted to shooting Amanda. According to court documents, the Blackburn home was the third target of the November 10th attack by Taylor, Watson, and Gordon. In the first break-in, the thieves stole a laptop, wallet, and car while the resident was asleep. While inside the home, they discovered they were being recorded by a video camera, but simply moved on. The group drove up to another home, broke in through a patio window and stole 4 televisions, a laptop, jewelry, a bag of oranges, and a pink sweater that eventually helped police identify them, the affidavit said. Court documents outlined the evidence police collected against the suspects. The most important piece of evidence: Watson's DNA was found on a pink sweater taken during the second burglary, which was then used to cover his face from a surveillance camera as he tried to withdraw cash using Amanda Blackburn's bank card. Watson and Gordon cooperated with the investigation in return for a reduced sentence. Larry Taylor waived his right to remain silent and admitted to being near the scene of the burglary. He said he may have stopped in the Blackburn neighborhood, but claimed he was so confused he couldn't remember. Formal charges were filed by the county prosecutor. Larry Taylor faces 13 charges, including the very same felony, after knowingly and willfully killing Amanda Blackburn. Jalen Watson is charged with a felony. Both he and Taylor face multiple charges of burglary, robbery, and theft. Diana Gordon, who was in custody due to a parole violation, also faces burglary charges. There was a 4th person who knew about the robberies, burglaries, and other crimes but did not participate in them. He was questioned and released. The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Violent Crimes Unit worked with the gang unit and federal marshals to arrest Taylor. Police Chief Rick Height praised the cooperation that led to the arrest. The detectives worked tirelessly, all day long without sleep, to solve the murders in the city. With the assistance of Assistant U.S. Attorney Josh Minkler and Prosecutor Terry Curry, justice was served. Because the victim was pregnant, prosecutors said they would consider filing additional charges related to the fetus. Even though the woman's underwear was removed and her shirt was pulled up, they said there was no evidence to support the rape charges. Larry Taylor's first trial took place in December 2021, but the trial was over in seconds when it was discovered that one of the jurors had shared information about the case with other jurors. The disclosure interrupted the trial. A mistrial was declared. The final trial was held in October 2022. Subsequent jury selection was more thorough. The county drew more than 100 people as possible jurors. Each had to fill out a 16-page questionnaire so attorneys could assess whether they could reach a fair verdict. Larry Joe Taylor was sentenced to 86 years in the Indiana State Correctional Institution for the murder of Amanda Blackburn and for additional charges related to a burglary from a home. Diana Gordon and Jalen Watson agreed to plea agreements and testified against Larry Taylor at trial. Both received sentences ranging from 20 to 35 years in prison. Jalen Watson and Larry Taylor are currently incarcerated in the Marion County Jail. A murder conviction in Indiana can send a person to prison for 45 to 60 years, and some are punishable by life in prison or the death penalty. Prosecutors filed a motion to enhance Larry Taylor's sentence, which means he could face an additional 20 years in prison because Amanda Blackburn was pregnant when he allegedly massacred her. Davy Blackburn, the church's pastor, said he is relieved that those responsible for killing his wife have been caught and will not be able to harm anyone else. Amanda Blackburn's death has resonated with thousands of people, including the state's chief executive. Her funeral at a Christian church was attended by more than 2,000 people. Among them was Governor Mike Pence. Resonant Church has set up a donation page to help pay for Amanda Blackburn's funeral and medical expenses. Davy Blackburn said he is hopeful for a judicial system that will certainly show wisdom to the people who have caused his family so much pain. Incredibly, he has repeatedly reported that he has decided to forgive Amanda's killers. "I was very relieved to learn of the arrest," he told reporters. "Although everything inside me wants to hate, be angry, and despair, I choose the path of forgiveness, grace, and hope." Amanda Blackburn's case has generated significant interest across the country, with coverage appearing in national and international media. Davy Blackburn changed his role from that of an unhappy husband to that of a popular blogger. He began to capitalize on his tragedy and record multiple podcasts and videos, which he called Nothing Wasted. He began appearing on TV stations and speaking out about his wife's death, repeating over and over the pain he had experienced and recounting the tragedy. But he didn't seem unhappy. Amanda's death made Davy not only famous, but rich. The fact that he received an insurance payout after his wife's death does suggest that he didn't accidentally forget to lock the door that day on November 10th, 2015. Didn't he? What do you guys think? On March 2nd, 2016, Davy Blackburn bought a new 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom home with a pool. He then sold the very house where Amanda was murdered. For an unhappy husband who lost his beloved, Davy was pretty happy. In July 2016, he posted a photo of his new home on his blog and captioned it, "How happy I am to have pool parties in my new home." Now Davy Blackburn is happy in his new marriage. Nothing is wasted serendipity. Turn your eyes to Jesus, gaze upon his marvelous countenance, and earthly things become strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. The Jared Bragan Case, From Love to Contracted End of Life. No matter how many years a couple has spent together or how happy their marriage was, divorces often lead to a breakdown in amicable, or at the very least, respectful relationships. But sometimes former husbands and wives part ways as true adversaries. Once close partners deliberately make each other's lives miserable, inflict harm, or wish for the other's demise. In rare instances, it doesn't stop at mere wishes, escalating to actual physical confrontations. Today, we'll examine such a case. To begin, it's important to note that the case surrounding the death of 33-year-old Jared Bragan, an employee of Microsoft and father of 4 young children, has yet to reach a conclusion. Currently, 3 individuals have been arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit a planned confrontation resulting in Bragan's death. 2 of them face the ultimate penalty of capital punishment. This sensational story that unfolded in the sunny state of Florida has, without exaggeration, shaken the entire country. Its protagonists are parents of multiple children, once bound by marriage. The motive for the crime is alarmingly mundane: a refusal to split jointly acquired assets and custody of their offspring. However, the approach to ending Bragan's life resembles a complex detective plot. Let's explore how former spouses and deeply religious individuals became the worst of enemies and why it all ended in a tragic demise. Who was Jared Bragan? Jared J. Bragan was born in 1989 in Florida, into a modest family where he was the second of 2 sons. He grew up alongside his older brother Adam, with whom he was practically inseparable from childhood. The brother's parents were devout members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As a teenager, Jared met a girl named Mallory Bowden at church. The two developed a romantic relationship, and Bowden would later refer to Jared as her first true love. However, their relationship never led to marriage, as cohabitation was discouraged within their religious community. Therefore, when Jared graduated from a Florida arts high school in 2007 and decided to further his education in another state, they parted ways. Jared moved to Utah, where he enrolled in college. Meeting his future first wife. In 2009, at the age of 20, Jared Bragan met a woman named Shanna Gardner at a friend's birthday party. She was 2 years his senior and came from a well-off family. She was also a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, previously mentioned. Shanna was born in 1987, and her parents, Starling and Shelley Gardner, were co-founders of a major company called Stampin' Up, which specialized in the production and sale of decorative and craft items. By 2010, it was reported that their family business, headquartered in Salt Lake City, was generating an annual revenue of $100 million. Shanna has a sister named Sarah, who currently holds a managerial position in the family business. As an heiress to such a wealthy family, Shanna grew up in luxury and was accustomed to living a life of leisure without ever working in her trained profession as a chef. She was described as enthusiastic and somewhat fickle. According to Mallory, who was mentioned earlier, Jared was initially not too interested in his new acquaintance. However, Shanna went out of her way to entice him with her lavish lifestyle, hinting that together they could travel the world and do as they pleased since her parents would financially support them. Family life and the birth of twins. Just a few months after their first encounter, the couple got engaged, and by early 2010, less than a year after they met, they celebrated a lavish wedding in a temple in Salt Lake City, Utah, with the Gardner family covering all expenses for the ceremony and reception. This quick move to marriage was influenced by the couple's religious beliefs, which frowned upon cohabitation and lengthy engagements. Following their wedding, the newlyweds settled in Utah, where the bride's parents helped them purchase a comfortable home valued at about $1 million. Each spouse also had their own Mercedes, despite Jared still being a student at the time and Shanna not working at all. The couple traveled extensively around the world, sharing numerous photos of their exciting trips, expensive purchases, and leisure activities on their social media profiles. According to close acquaintances, Shanna's parents gave the couple around $10,000 monthly for various expenses and also granted them free access to their accounts. Moreover, after Jared completed his degree, his in-laws generously provided him with $100,000 to start his own business. In 2013, the couple welcomed twins, a daughter, Abigail, and a son, Liam. The family moved to Connecticut for a time, but soon after, Liam was diagnosed with a heart condition and lung issues. Doctors recommended moving closer to the sea, noting that it would benefit the child's health. The Bragans relocated to Florida, where they purchased a 2-story comfortable home near the coastline at Ponte Vedra Beach, south of Jacksonville. At this time, Shanna actively managed her own blog on social media, portraying herself as a loving wife, a caring mother to the twins, a professional chef, and a woman passionate about travel and sports. She took fitness seriously and visited the gym nearly every day. Seeing her dedication, Jared decided to surprise his beloved and hired a personal trainer for her. The scandalous divorce. Shortly after moving, clear issues emerged in the marriage, though the couple stubbornly pretended everything was fine. Shanna became disillusioned with their religion, almost ceasing church attendance, while her husband remained a devout and exemplary member. This difference in religious commitment led to arguments, misunderstandings, and tension. Reportedly, Shanna also became disillusioned with Jared, whom she perceived as too lazy, having gained weight and still only half-heartedly attempting to get his business off the ground. After completing online courses in programming and design, Jared secured a position at Microsoft, finally starting to earn independently. A few years later, he advanced to a senior manager role. Nonetheless, the couple grew increasingly distant, and arguments became a routine occurrence in their household. The situation escalated when Jared accidentally discovered intimate exchanges between his wife and her personal fitness trainer. According to some sources, Shanna had an affair, which the trainer confirmed in a phone conversation with Jared, though Shanna vehemently denied these claims. Jared then reached out to Mallory Bowden via email, lamenting that his wife had grown distant and emotionally attached to her gym trainer. Despite this, he expressed willingness to forgive the infidelity and preserve their family for the sake of their children. In 2015, after nearly 6 years of marriage, the couple began a contentious and scandalous divorce process. They contested over shared assets and custody rights for their children, far from amicably. Jared publicly accused his ex-wife of infidelity, which she categorically denied, claiming the marriage had simply lost its love. In response, she accused him of cruelty and offensive behavior. Shanna was unwilling to divide their home, cars, and bank account funds, arguing that nearly everything they acquired over the years was purchased or gifted by her parents. Jared had only started working less than a year prior. Having previously focused on his studies, and unsuccessfully trying to establish his business with funds from his in-laws. Jared contested this viewpoint, claiming at least half of their Florida home. Custody of the twins also sparked numerous disputes. Shanna claimed that Jared, whenever with the children, tried to turn them against her. He allegedly coached them on what to say about their mother and recorded their statements to present in court. Jared, in turn, accused his ex-wife of comprehensive surveillance, including installing hidden cameras in their home, tapping his phone calls, and placing a tracker in his car to monitor his movements. Shanna sought sole custody of the children and the exclusive ownership of their seaside home. She also claimed Jared threatened to withdraw all the money from their children's trust funds for his personal use. Jared countered by alleging his ex-wife evaded taxes by working off the books at her parents' company and receiving tens of thousands of dollars. New families, old disputes. By the end of 2015, the court had mandated joint custody of the children, but that hardly put an end to the disputes between Jared and Shanna. Even after their divorce was officially finalized, they continued to meet in court for nearly 7 more years, leading up to the tragic conclusion of their saga. By this time, both had moved on to start new families and have more children. In 2016, Jared met a woman named Christina, a fellow Microsoft employee who lived and worked in North Carolina. Initially, their interactions were strictly professional, but they gradually grew closer, and a few months later, Christina moved to Florida to be with Jared. In the fall of 2017, they married, and by February 2019, they welcomed their first child together, a daughter named Bexley. In August 2021, their son London was born. Shanna, too, remarried in 2018, tying the knot with Mario Fernandez, a man a year her junior who owned a real estate business. That same year, they welcomed their son Michael. The family resided in the same house where Shanna had lived with her first husband, Jared, the house that had been a battleground in their court disputes. The presence of new families did not calm the waters between the ex-spouses, who continued to file lawsuits against each other with new demands. Jared insisted that Shanna's new husband, Mario, should not be allowed to be with the twins if their mother was absent. Conversely, he wanted his new wife, Christina, to be fully involved in the upbringing of his older children. The last court meeting between Jared and Shanna occurred 4 months before Jared's death and was exceptionally tense. They exchanged another round of mutual accusations and contested the rights to their property. Shanna claimed that Jared was preventing her from using the family's larger, more comfortable vehicle for transporting the children because he was more concerned with humiliating the mother than with the convenience and safety of his own children. At this point, the court granted Shanna exclusive rights to use the larger vehicle and ordered Jared to pay her $600 in compensation. The tragic end on a secluded road. Per the agreement between the ex-spouses, Jared picked up the twins on Wednesdays for a family dinner, including their younger sister Bexley. Christina sometimes joined them, but after the birth of London, she spent most of her time with the newborn, preferring not to leave him with babysitters. On Wednesday, February 22, 2022, Jared, following routine, took the children to a coastal cafe after picking them up. After dinner and a stroll, he dropped the twins back at their mother's house and then headed home on his usual route. The journey typically took about 40 minutes, part of which traversed a rather deserted stretch of road without streetlights. It was here that Bragan encountered an unexpected obstacle. Driving slowly and cautiously, aware of his 3-year-old daughter asleep in her car seat, it was around 9 in the evening, and the sun had set when suddenly, in the headlights, he spotted a tire lying in his lane. He stopped, activated his hazard lights, and got out to move the tire to the side of the road. That's when the shots rang out. Jared had no chance to escape. The perpetrator, acting with deadly precision, fired several bullets at close range before fleeing the scene. The child, dozing in the car, was unharmed. A passerby, nearby at the time, heard the shots and cautiously approached. Discovering Jared lying in a pool of blood, he immediately called the police and paramedics, but tragically, it was too late to save the victim. The investigation and initial suspicions Christina called her husband just minutes before the incident, and he informed her that he had just dropped off the children and would be home in about 15 minutes. However, 30 minutes passed, then an hour, and Jared was nowhere to be seen and stopped answering his phone calls. Anxiously trying his number again, Christina was answered by a police officer who informed her of the incident and requested her immediate presence at the Jacksonville Beach police station. The investigation team at the scene determined that the obstacle on the road, a tire, was the reason for Jared's vehicle stopping. They concluded that he had exited his car to remove the obstacle, but was then shot. His 3-year-old daughter, asleep in the car, was unharmed, indicating she was not the target of the mysterious shooter. Furthermore, no valuables were missing from the vehicle, where a wallet with cash, a phone, and a tablet were left, effectively dismissing the robbery theory almost immediately. When asked whether her husband had any known enemies, antagonists, or recent conflicts, Christina stated she was unaware of anyone wishing harm upon her husband, other than his first wife, Shanna. However, she refrained from making direct accusations without incontrovertible evidence. The police reported a lack of surveillance footage due to the absence of cameras on the stretch of road where the incident occurred. A witness who heard the shots claimed they broke the silence of the night, preceded by neither screeching brakes nor loud screams or any other noise. However, they did hear the sound of a vehicle speeding away, though nothing was visible in the darkness. Christina's suggestion of Shanna's involvement in the crime seemed plausible to investigators, yet detectives knew it was unlikely she acted directly, especially given her solid alibi of being at home with her husband, the twins, her younger son, and her parents who were visiting. The police decided to check nearby surveillance cameras. The footage showed an old dark blue Ford F-150 with brown trim entering the area about 15 minutes before the incident, and again a few minutes after the shots were reported by the witness. Detectives turned to the public for help in identifying the vehicle of interest. Jared's family made television appeals, urging anyone with even the slightest information potentially related to the case to come forward. The first suspect arrested, Shanna, and her current husband, Mario, were repeatedly called in for questioning, but vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. Shanna didn't hide the fact that her relationship with her ex-husband was complicated, but she insisted she would never wish harm upon the father of her children. She also shared with the media how the 9-year-old twins reacted to the news of their father's death. According to her, Abigail cried uncontrollably for hours, while Liam was in shock and silent for a long time. It's worth noting that neither the ex-spouse nor the older children attended Jared's funeral. Christina had told Shanna that her presence at the farewell ceremony was highly unwelcome, to which Shanna responded that if she wasn't allowed to be there, the twins wouldn't attend the burial either. It wasn't until January 2023, almost a year after Mr. Bragan's murder, that the first suspect was arrested. The police had been silent about the progress of the investigation, only noting that it involved considerable resources and effort. After an exhaustive search for the dark blue Ford F-150, luck finally smiled on the investigation when the vehicle was involved in an accident, but left the scene before the police arrived. This time, the incident occurred in a crowded area with many witnesses, and the offender was identified the same day thanks to multiple camera recordings. The car was owned by 62-year-old Henry Tienan, an unemployed man with previous convictions. He was charged with second-degree premeditated murder using a firearm, participation in a criminal conspiracy with the intent to commit murder, and setting up an ambush with an obstruction for the victim. Jacksonville Beach Police Chief Jonathan Paul Smith and City Prosecutor Melissa Nelson announced these charges during a press conference. It was also revealed that Tienan did not act alone and was giving testimony against his accomplices, though no other names were disclosed at that time to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. Understanding the severity of the charges against him and the lengthy prison term he faced, Tienan decided to make a deal with law enforcement, hoping his cooperation would be considered favorably during sentencing and potentially reduce his punishment. The criminal trio unraveled information soon leaked to the press that the accused, Tienan, had been renting a small house with a friend owned by Mario Fernandez. Tenon's housemate was also brought in for questioning, but was unable to provide any valuable information about the case. He didn't even have personal dealings with the owner of their rental, only passing his share of the rent through Henry. However, a thorough search of the house revealed a hidden pistol in the accused's room, which, according to ballistic tests, was identified as the murder weapon. This further implicated Tenon in the crime. On March 16, 2023, Mario Fernandez was arrested after Tenon officially pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against Mario, whom he named as the contractor of the crime. Fernandez faced charges of first-degree murder, criminal conspiracy, and incitement to commit a serious crime. Rumors swirled that Shanna was the mastermind behind the murder. This was supported by her former lover, a fitness trainer who recounted how she had expressed a long-standing dislike for her then-husband and wished for his demise. A tattoo artist, where Shanna frequented, also testified. She recalled Shanna complaining about the endless legal battles with her ex-husband, wishing to silence him forever, and inquiring if she knew someone who could help. Initially taken as a grim joke, Shanna repeated her inquiry months later, clearly indicating her seriousness. Shanna Gardner Fernandez vehemently denied all allegations against her. She declared her intention to stay in town and assist the investigation. However, a few months after her husband's arrest, she moved to Washington with the twins and her youngest son. On August 17, 2023, she faced the same charges as her current husband. Arrested in her Washington apartment, she was extradited to Florida, where she would stand trial alongside the criminal trio. The motive for her actions was cited as complicated relationships with her ex-husband, a desire to avoid sharing custody of their 2 children, and the ambition to solely possess all disputed assets. The ongoing legal battle. As of now, the case remains open, and legal proceedings against all conspirators are underway. Tenon has pleaded guilty to all charges, is actively cooperating with the investigation, and hopes for leniency. Reports suggest he faces at least 15 years in prison, a substantial period for someone of his advanced age, potentially equivalent to a life sentence. Mario Fernandez has only partially admitted his guilt, and exercising his legal rights, has refused to testify against his wife. On the other hand, Shanna Gardner Fernandez vehemently denies all charges against her. Nevertheless, prosecutors are seeking the death penalty or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the couple. Shanna's 3 children are currently under the care of their maternal grandparents, Starling and Shelley Gardner, and their Aunt Sarah.